Turn that on. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin, Mayor Murdoch. Just starting off a special committee of the whole to look at committees and commissions. Welcome, everyone. We are uh, holding this meeting on the traditional territories of the Coast and Strait Salish people, specifically the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. And we just recognize that their connections to these lands continue to this day. We are going to get right into it. We are having a committee of the whole, so it's a reasonably informal process. They are being live streamed and will be archived for future viewing. And I don't think I have an awful lot to add other than I do want to express my appreciation at the beginning of this just for the work undertaken. This is sort of the first chance that we've had a chance to really look at these and go through them and have a discussion as a community. But I think it's a very important piece. These committees, commissions, working groups, all these pieces play such an important role for us as a council, as an advisory capacity, and to fill in the gaps of expertise and knowledge, as well as helping us sort of punch above our weight as a community. So it's an important piece of work, and I think at the end of this, we're going to have a really high functioning set of committees and commissions going forward. But we have a ways to go. So with that, I'll hand it over to, I guess, Ms. Varela to do a quick introduction. And I should probably just officially welcome Ms. Santarossa as well, who is the author of the report and will be answering any specific questions we have on the report, although I think most of our questions are to ourselves as to what we want to do next, but we'll go forward. Ms. Varela.
Thank you. As the mayor stated, we're here for the report out on the committee and commission review, and thanks to those in the gallery for attending. For the benefit of the gallery, we do want to clarify that this is a council mandated project with approved terms of reference. Council really wanted to look at this with an objective third-party lens, and we were very lucky to retain Ms. Santarossa, who has over 20 years experience in local government. And she's done an excellent job on delivering on this council-defined project, so we're lucky. So the consultation for this, as discussed with council when developing those terms of reference, included the council, staff, committee, and commission members. And Ms. Santarossa will speak more to the methodology for the development of the report beyond this. But I've heard some questions about how does the public participate in this process? And that's a really good question. Tonight is the start of the public participation in this process. And the reasons behind this relate to a number of factors. One is the purpose of the advisory bodies themselves. So advisory bodies exist to augment council's decision making. They provide recommendations versus decisions. That's really council's purview, but they're a value-added piece of that process. We can also look to best practices. So how do other communities deal with a review of their commissions and committees? And we actually reached out to some of our neighbors, Central Saanich, North Saanich, Saanich, Sydney, and Pitt Meadows. And while not everyone has undertaken a review since the election, their process all followed the same way, again, because of the nature of the product. We also want to establish a common knowledge base upon which the public can engage from an informed position, and it also augments council's decision-making process going forward. And the fourth aspect is that not all deliverables that come out of this local government, or any local government, have the same kind of public participation. And that's really important for both the public and council to understand. So if we look to IAP2, which is sort of that, it's the go-to framework for public participation, it recognizes 5 phases on a spectrum: inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. And when we look at the left-hand side of that spectrum, the inform and consult, informing is about providing the public with balanced and objective information, which is this report, to assist them in understanding the problem, alternatives, opportunities, and or solutions. We also look to consult, which is tonight, where we look to obtain public feedback on the analysis, the alternatives, and or the decisions. So those are the 18 recommendations contained in the report. Involve, collaborate, empower as we move to the right-hand side of that spectrum. Collaborate would be an official community plan, and empower would be something like an election, a referendum, an alternative approval process, something like that. So there really is a scale on public participation for government products. So we know Council wanted to inform and consult, and so how and where is that done? And the answer is right here tonight is the first step. So public participation comes out of the report presented here at the Committee of the Whole. And I think one of the things we have to do better as a district is helping the public understand that when something hits the Committee of the Whole, it is not a fait accompli. This is the platform from which things hit the public realm. So we have to do better at that. And then we also have to let people know how it's going to go moving forward. So this is not the one and only time. Once Council makes its decision making, which might expand past tonight itself, there's also going to be other opportunities as we move into the implementation pieces. So you're going to have things like the procedure bylaw, which we've committed to bringing before the end of 2019. There's going to be terms of reference and or establishing bylaws for any new commissions or commission structure that the Council may select. And there's also going to be relevant policies and processes. And again, those are all going to be presented at future Committee of the Wholes. And just a shameless plug, the public is also encouraged to write to Mayor and Council to share their insights and opinions on this or any other undertaking. Mayor and Council can be reached at obcouncil@oakbay.ca. The public can also attend the meetings. And they could also drop off at correspondence at Municipal Hall or make an appointment. So Council prides itself on being very accessible. So back to the report at hand, again, really the emphasis has been on a third-party analysis and objectivity. We really wanted a lens from outside the organization. And it was sort of interesting, this process, when we looked to timing of the information release, because both public and staff received this report at the same time, which was the day of the agenda publication, other than myself and the Director of Corporate Services. So it really was about getting this information out to stakeholders at the same time. So I've heard the question or the concern about how is the public going to participate in advisory body meetings going forward? And I think Council has some decision making to do before we actually hit that place. Whatever this looks like, this will be determined and endorsed by Council as we work through the implementation stage. So again, that's a piece that's going to be coming forward. You have to get that structure wrestled with first. And I guess as we're moving towards my summary, I want to emphasize that advisory bodies are a really important piece of a complex council decision-making process. You consider advisory bodies, plans and policies, regulations and legislation. You have staff recommendations, which interestingly enough may or may not align with advisory body recommendations. You're going to receive public input, which also may not align. There may be financial considerations and other things like other levels of governance. It's a really complex decision-making process, but the idea is you want a lot of depth to that, which again is that purpose of that advisory body structure. So I think if you move forward, I always like to take an interest-based approach on these things, because I think when you pull things apart, we actually have a lot of commonalities that people can agree on. So everybody can agree that the advisory body input that you receive, whatever form that is, has a lot of value. That's a key piece of this puzzle. You also want to effectively use the volunteer hours and the huge community commitment that goes into those bodies. You want to optimize staff time and efforts. Value is a consideration. And we can all agree that we need enhanced clarification of mandates, roles and responsibilities, processes, and other pieces of that. And in the end, this is about effective governance and decision making. Thank you. I'm going to hand that over to Sonia now for her presentation of the report and the 18 recommendations.
First trick is...
Can you get it?
And while you're just bringing that up there, I'll just let know of those in the audience who want to know there is a public input portion of this. If you want to speak, we're going to go through the recommendation. We're going to take questions from council at the end of each section. There's 3 sections, and then at the end of that, we'll go to the public and solicit any additional comments or information as well. So we have that opportunity. And welcome. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. Santarossa. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to start off with just a general overview, touch on some of the highlights of the report that's in front of you, the 50-page report and the number of appendices. And then, as the Mayor had mentioned, we'll go into the recommendations and discuss those individually. So I just wanted to start off with a slide that talks about what are committees and why are they established typically. So committees are typically, they're bodies that are appointed by council to help them in the decision-making process. As Ms. Varela mentioned earlier, they augment the decision-making process by council. They provide advice and recommendations, and typically they're either, depending on the type of committee, and which we'll talk about in a second, they can either be comprised of all council members or a combination of council members and community members, or primarily community members with council representation. And their duty is, and their roles and responsibility is to provide advice and recommendations to council for consideration to make the final decision. They're also an additional opportunity for members of the public to serve and to provide their input and represent the community as well. And Oak Bay is really, really fortunate in having access to really experienced staff as well as really experienced and educated community members who are really willing to serve and really want to serve and help the community out. So Oak Bay is definitely blessed in having the staff and the community members to assist them in their work. So we have a number of different types of committees that are outlined in the report. I'll just touch on each of them quickly. The first is a standing committee. And a standing committee, as defined in the community charter, is a committee that the mayor must establish, and I'll emphasize must, if he or she feels that there is something that could be better served and dealt with by a committee. Now, committees typically have a more specific mandate, so it's an opportunity to really delve into a little bit further into an issue that council may not have the time to do because their mandate is a lot broader. So with respect to standing committees, the mayor appoints and establishes those committees, and the membership must be comprised of at least 50% of council members. For a standing committee, in some cases, all of the members are council members. In the case of Oak Bay, the one standing committee that you do have is your committee of the whole. The second type of committee is a select committee, and this again is defined in the legislation, and this is a committee that council appoints and establishes. So council appoints the membership compared to the standing committee where the mayor would appoint the membership. Council would establish and appoint the membership to a select committee. At least one member must be a council member, and the remaining members can serve from the community at large or other representation that council sees fit. An advisory committee is really just another name for a select committee, so there's not specific reference in the legislation to advisory. But standing committees and select committees and task forces and working groups that we'll talk about, they all provide advice and recommendations to council. Unless council has delegated authority to a commission, for example, or to a committee to actually allow them to make a decision, they really are only providing advice and recommendations. And again, I can't emphasize enough that it's really council who makes the decision at the end of the day. So in some cases, you could have an advisory committee, and in this case, you have your advisory design panel, your public arts advisory committee, and your tourism committee, which are select committees and operate in an advisory capacity to council. You also have task forces and working groups, and they could be formed as either a select committee or a standing committee. So you could have a standing work group that's comprised of all council members, or you could have a select working group which is comprised of a combination of council and community members. An example of that would be your Heritage Conservation Working Group. So again, Each of these committees has a defined mandate in terms of reference, and this should be set out either by bylaw, depending on its composition, or by general terms of reference that are approved by council. And with the case of a task force or a working group, they typically have a specific task to undertake, and once that task is completed and they reported their findings back to council, that task force or that working group would typically dissolve. Another type is a commission, and the legislation sets out that a council may establish and appoint a commission to do one or more of the following, and that is to operate services, to undertake the operation and enforcement in relation to council's exercise of its authority, as well as to manage property and licenses held by the municipality. So an example here in Oak Bay is your Parks and Recreation and Culture Commission. And as well as your Heritage Commission. So with respect to the Parks, Recreation and Culture Commission, there is some delegated authority in that establishing bylaw. So again, a commission must be established by bylaw as opposed to a simple resolution, as it would be for the other committees. And in this case, it has some delegated authority, which allows that commission to make decisions on behalf of council. There are certain things that council can't delegate, so they can't delegate the authority to approve a budget. They can't delegate authority to enact bylaws. So there's a number of things that council can't give away all of its authority, but it can give away some of its authority to a committee or a commission. In addition to just the commissions I noted earlier, the Advisory Planning Commission is also a commission that a local government can establish, and that's set out in the Local Government Act. And a council can establish an advisory planning commission to deal with matters respecting land use, community planning, or proposed bylaws and permits. And Oak Bay has established, I think within the last 4 or 5 years, an advisory planning commission. And then finally, you have your subcommittees. So it may be that one of your committees that you've established or one of your commissions has the authority to establish a subcommittee. That authority should be set out in the establishing bylaw or the terms of reference. So if the bylaws or the terms of reference don't indicate that a subcommittee can be established, then there should not be a subcommittee that is formed. A subcommittee can be comprised of a subset of that particular committee or commission, or it could include other membership as that committee sees fit. And the meeting procedures and functions apply to those subcommittees as well. So they need to make sure they provide meeting notice, they have agendas, minutes are prepared, they have a quorum for their meetings. So just to keep that in mind with subcommittees. Any questions as I move along? Happy to take questions along the way. Yes.
Councillor Green.
Thank you, and through you, thank you, Ms. Santarossa. Just one question on the APC. Is it possible, I see the word "or" that separates each of the areas of responsibility potentially. Is it possible for an APC to do all three of those things, and that is land use, community planning, and proposed bylaws and permits? In other words, are they mutually exclusive, or can all of those be wrapped under the APC?
I believe that is the case. I believe they can do all three.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to point out with respect to membership for an APC, at least 2/3 of the members of an advisory planning commission should be members or residents of the municipality. And the legislation is very specific about who cannot be a member. So for example, a council member, an employee or officer of the municipality, or an approving officer may not be a member of the advisory planning commission in that they cannot vote on matters, but they can act as a resource. Whereas for a select committee, you could have a council member that has been appointed and has voting privileges at a select committee.
Councillor Green, you had a follow-up?
Just to follow up or supplementary, thank you for the clarification. And can a council member act as a liaison to the Advisory Planning Commission? A council liaison?
Yes. So
just for clarity,
the legislation says they can act as a resource. So the council liaison could act as a resource, but they would not have voting privileges.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you so much, Chair, and appreciate the opportunity to ask questions as you go, if you don't mind. This is great. Could you, I understand commissions, since they're established by bylaws, generally live across mandates or mandate after mandate after mandate, the commission lives on, rooted in a bylaw. But with respect to committees, I'm unsure how they live, how they die, and whether they survive the end of one mandate and the beginning of another. Could you clarify that, please?
And yes, I'll try my best to clarify that. With respect to committees and commissions, as long as council continues to make appointments to those committees, then they continue to live. There's, at a certain point, should council wish to review the structure as you're doing now, it might be that there might be some changes along the way and certain committees dissolve and others are established. So as long as those annual appointments or regular appointments continue to take place, then those committees continue to live.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just, can I ask, for my clarification of subcommittees, because I can just imagine how complicated this could be for in real terms. So if you have a subcommittee that's less than the quorum of the committee, even if it's like a subcommittee of 2 that wants to meet and work on something and bring it back to the committee, if they're officially mandated to do that, then they're supposed to be established in the terms of reference or the establishing bylaw. Is that correct?
The terms of reference or establishing bylaw should indicate that the committee has the authority to establish a subcommittee. And you do have that with some of your Parks and Recreation Commission, for example, has that authority in its bylaws, and I believe the Heritage Commission as well. So and it could be less than a subset of the quorum of the actual committee. So your new quorum is now based on 2 members for your subcommittee. So your quorum in this case, that case would be 2.
Okay, fair. Thank you. And all the same rules apply? I'm just
Yes.
curious. Okay, if we have in our established or in our policies, for instance, to amplify sound, which we're trying to get to for most of our committees and commission, does that carry forward to things like subcommittees then that wish to meet? Because they would often not have access to our facilities. I'm just trying to get my head around where this cuts off. Ms. Varela?
So with regards to amplified sound in particular, any of the committee or commission meetings that occur in council chambers, we've committed to providing amplified sound. We only have the technical capabilities in these chambers.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, thank you very much.
So the purpose of the review, as Ms. Varela touched on earlier, is we have a newly elected council, and it's typically a good time after an election to take a look at your committee and commission structure. You may have some new members on council, you may have a new mayor that may wish to establish different standing committees, and council may wish to establish new select committees. So this is a good opportunity to have that review. I'm not quite sure when the last review took place, maybe in the last 5 years, maybe longer, I'm not sure. So this is a really good opportunity to make sure that with a new council, that the committees that you have in place align with your strategic objectives, which you have just recently established. So it's a good opportunity for that review.
I think we traditionally review every 40 years. I think that's our tradition.
I don't think it's been that long, but it's been a while. And you also want to make sure that your committees are established and aligned so that there's effective governance and that you're maximizing the time and efforts of your volunteer community members as well as your staff. So it's a really good thing to set in place a bit of a regular review so that things remain current and consistent across the board. Oh, I have to. So included in the review were the following committees and commissions. So I took a look at the Advisory Design Panel, the Heritage Commission, the Heritage Foundation, the Advisory Planning Commission, and the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Commission. I took a bit of a cursory sort of higher level look at the Public Art Advisory Committee, the Tourism Committee, and the subcommittees as well. And in terms of consultation, I did meet with council as a whole, as well as with individual council members. I sat down with each council member. I also sat down with the staff that support the committees and the commissions. I met with the committees and commissions, each one of them as a whole. We had a meeting and we talked about some of their, what's working well, what's not working well. And then each individual member on the committees and commissions were issued a questionnaire that they submitted to me in confidence. And so taking a look at all of this feedback, this has resulted in this report and the recommendations that are in front of you, as well as my own general observations, which I'll touch on in a second. So the following documents should guide the function, mandate, and procedures for committees and commissions. And the first being your council procedure bylaw, which actually sets out procedures, meeting procedures, and functions as it relates to the committees. You also have goals that you've identified in your strategic plan, as well as goals in the official community plan. And your committees really should be structured to align with those goals, because they're meant to augment the council's decision-making process, as I've said earlier, as well as to assist council and the organization in achieving those goals and objectives that you've outlined in your strategic plan and your official community plan. The 5-year financial plan will allocate any resources and any funding necessary to assist council and the organization in achieving those objectives and those goals. And then also you have a code of ethics that that should sort of mandate the behavior of your committee and commission members amongst themselves, as well as the behavior of staff and the chair and council members, not only amongst themselves, but with any applicants that might come forward as well. So I've in the report, I've gone into a little bit more detail on the guiding documents, but these really should help sort of guide how your committees and commissions are established and how they should function. I also touched on some evaluation criteria that I use to sort of, as a bit of a benchmark to sort of measure how Oak Bay is functioning against what I, based on my previous experience and best practices that I've seen. So I took a look at sort of the establishment, essentially who has the authority to establish these committees and commissions. I also took a look at composition and size. So composition, membership should represent the community at large or specific facets of the community, depending on what the mandate of the committee or commission is. There should be a variety of expertise on the committee or commission. General size of membership, anywhere from 5 to 8 members is usually a good size. I know that Oak Bay has some committees that I think are slightly larger than that, but there's not really any that are over the top. So pretty good on that end. There should at least be one council liaison to provide that continuity and connection back to council. And there should be a balance of new and returning members as well. With respect to the function and mandate, I took a look at whether or not there is a regular review that takes place of the function and mandate of the committees and commissions, and whether or not they're operating within their established mandate. And I also took a look, reviewed the sort of roles and responsibilities. With respect to accountability, essentially these committees and commissions do exist at the pleasure of council. Council has the authority to establish committees and commissions based on what their priorities and objectives are. And they provide advice and recommendations to council. And then with respect to the code of conduct, any code of conduct that has been established by council really should also apply to your committees and commissions as well to ensure a respectful workplace. As well as the chair should also be the official spokesperson for the committee and commission, and individual members shouldn't be speaking on behalf of the committee or commission. They can certainly represent their own individual interests, but they really shouldn't be representing the interests of the committee or commission. That's the role of the chair. With respect to the role of the chair really should work with staff to set the agenda, and they're responsible for the meeting conduct and conduct of its members and those present at the meeting, so as well as being the official spokesperson on behalf of the committee or commission. Members, they should be attending meetings on a regular basis, so if they're going to apply to sit on a committee, they should be available to attend those meetings, and if not, then they really should perhaps step aside and allow an opportunity for somebody else to serve. They should come prepared to the meetings, so that means reviewing their agenda materials, and treat others with respect, and as well as I mentioned, speaking to their own individual opinions and not on behalf of the committee as a whole. I looked at the role of the council liaison, and they essentially represent council and council's perspective to the committee or commission, and they also should serve to represent the committee or commission's perspective back to council when that item is for consideration at the council table. And then finally, the role of staff. So staff really should work with the chair to set the agenda. They're responsible for preparing the reports, presenting the information, and responding to questions. And they also should be available to assist with meeting procedures at the meeting. So let's take a look at that, some of that basic evaluation criteria to sort of measure against how Oak Bay is operating.
Ms. Santarossa,
Yes.
just 2 quick questions on that. You mentioned that the liaison bringing the perspective back to this table, but sometimes the opinion of the work of a committee is not the same as the liaison that's going to be at this table. So you're saying that they should just be able to articulate the discussion and the issues raised at the table. You don't have to reflect the intent of that body or commission. Is that correct?
I would say that the council liaison should be able to relay back to the council what the discussion around the committee table was with respect to an application and what led them to reach a certain decision or recommendation, whether or not that council liaison is in agreement with the recommendation coming forward.
And my other question is just regarding chairs, is there a standard or best practices for appointing chairs? Like, is that something that council would normally do, or that the bodies would do themselves, or where does that usually fit?
That depends on how it's set out in the terms of reference or the establishing bylaws. Some of those documents indicate that the chair is to be selected from among its members. In the case of a standing committee, for example, if you were to appoint, you could appoint the chair or vice chair. A select committee, if it's not laid out in the terms of reference as to how a chair or vice chair is to be appointed, then it could be council that makes those appointments. So it really is determined on how it's set out in your establishing bylaw terms of reference.
There's no standard approach to it, just all whatever
Yeah.
one wants to do.
It really
Okay.
depends on the community and
Yeah, thank you.
council. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So just, I'm going to touch on some of the general observations that I've noted in section 3 of the report. I'm just going to touch on a few of them, not all of them. So with respect to the alignment with the strategic plan and the official community plan goals, I would say that overall, your committees as it currently exists do touch on at least one or more of the strategic plan goals and OCP goals. I think what's recommended or required is perhaps a stronger link in the mandate or terms of reference of your committee commission back to these individual goals, as well as better communication back to the committees and commissions. Some of the feedback I did receive was that they weren't quite clear on what council's priorities were, so a little bit stronger communication and a stronger link in the terms of reference and mandate back to these goals. So again, because council does change every 4 years and perhaps your priorities change, they could change every year, every 2 years as new priorities emerge, it's important to always go back and review the mandates of your committees and commissions to ensure that link that it's aligned with what your goals are. In terms of orientation and training, there should be regular orientation and training of both new committee members as well as existing committee members. There's no harm in reviewing on a regular basis, whether it's annually or biannually, what the roles and responsibilities of the staff, of council, of the committee members are, as well as to review the mandate as well, just to ensure that there's an understanding throughout the committee and commission of what their mandate is. This will help perhaps mitigate or minimize some of the independent work plans that have been arising in some of the committees, which can pose some challenges, especially if there's not resources available to actually implement some of these new initiatives that are being presented by the committees or commissions. It sort of sets up an expectation on behalf of on the committee members to expect when they put forward a new initiative that it be implemented. And again, if there's no resources set aside, it might be challenging for both council and staff to implement that. So just a regular review of the roles and responsibilities as well as the mandate of your committee and commission should take place on a regular basis. And one of my recommendations reflects that. So regular review and oversight again, as I mentioned. I'm losing my papers here. Just a regular review and oversight. So right now there is not a department that's been assigned oversight of all of the committees and commissions. They are being supported by different departments, which is fine, but there should be one department that is tasked with oversight, just to ensure that the meeting procedures and functions are being consistent or being applied consistently across the board, that there's a consistent look and feel to your meeting notices, your agendas, how the minutes are prepared, and that sort of thing. So one of my recommendation reflects that as well. Appointments and recruitment. It's not clear that there is a consistent time and way to appoint and recruit committee and commission members. I've heard a couple of conflicting comments where we don't have enough members to serve, so the same people are always coming back. I've also heard that there are people that are waiting to sit on committees and commissions, but because there seems to be a rollover of current members, they don't seem to have an opportunity. So I think one of the recommendations is that staff review that appointment and recruitment process and standardize a process so that perhaps set it at the same time each year. So September or October, you recruit for new committee and commission members where vacancies might occur, so that the public is aware that that's going to happen on a consistent and regular basis, and there's a little bit more awareness out there as well. And another, with respect to roles and responsibilities, a number of comments were made throughout the process about not being clear what the role of staff was, what the role of the council liaison was, what the role of members were. So I've heard instances where members were perhaps meeting with applicants individually, members wanting to conduct site visits. So I think as part of an orientation program, an ability to clarify what the roles and responsibilities are for both the chair, members, staff, and council liaison. Any questions or comments?
I'm just going to have a quick one. Is there any? I don't think this was included in the scope, but I think we could all agree this is the right thing to do. But is there any sense of how much time it would take from like not having it now to actually provide sort of regular orientation training oversight, like from a staffing perspective and from a do you have any, was that looked at all in terms of what that would be requirement in terms of staffing support?
So in my experience, I think developing the orientation program will take a little bit of time to do that. But once it's established, it really is just sitting down with the committee or commission at its first meeting and just walking through and perhaps spending an hour or even more, depending on how many questions the committee or commission may have, to just walk through about basic meeting procedures, what the role of staff is, what the role of members are, reviewing the mandate as well, and perhaps giving an opportunity for some discussion around the mandate. So I'm thinking that can be accomplished at the first meeting each year as each committee gets set up, and then they can be off and running at subsequent meetings.
Councillor Green?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Ms. Santarossa, who would you recommend would do that work? Would that be corporate services and led by corporate services based on your recommendation to group committees and commissions in that area, which I agree with? Would that be corporate services staff that would conduct the orientation in your view? Thank you.
Do I turn to you to answer that?
Ms. Varela for that answer.
I think the first step would be to develop the orientation package. We'd probably need some external help given our current workload and capacity. And then we'd do a rollout plan that we'd have council endorse for that orientation process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, linking back to the budgeting question is always the important one. Yes, Councillor Zelka?
This is actually a question on behalf of Councillor Patterson, who has apparently lost her voice. So we'll do our best. The question from Councillor Patterson, how and when does Council consider the resourcing allocation for each committee in terms of staff time, budget implications, those sorts of things?
Who would like to take that question on?
Certainly, we'll be bringing that forward as part of the strategic planning process. There's a certain amount that we can do within existing resources, and as council expands that desired service level, we'll be requesting resources accordingly.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Santarossa.
So now we get on to the recommendations part of the report. And the recommendations, there's 18 recommendations as noted, and they're really a reflection of the feedback that's been received, the research that's been conducted, as well as my own general observations. And so they've been grouped into three main categories: policy, process, and structure. And I'll begin with the recommendations around policy. And I'll just walk through each one separately, and there'll be questions at the end, I understand, of the policy section. So the first recommendation is that council establish a vision and guiding principles to establish council committees and commissions. And what I'm recommending here is that council establish why do committees exist? So what is the purpose for committees? So some sort of a broader policy recommendation or vision as to why why council would consider establishing a committee or a commission. And then coupled with that would be staff being directed to draft a policy to guide the function and operations of council committees and commissions. So this would be, in addition to this policy, this vision that council would establish in the first part of the recommendation, the second would be a little bit more detail as to how committees and commissions function. So you have your council procedure bylaw, which is a little bit more general. It talks about council, and it does have some procedures that apply to committees. This policy that I'm recommending in recommendation number 2 goes into a little bit more detail about how they function. And so some of the content could include how committees and commissions are established, how appointments are made, the role of council and staff, the chair and members, the council liaison role, how minutes and agendas are prepared, meeting schedule. It could go into a bit more detail about meeting procedures, how to make a motion, those sorts of things, as well as making motions and voting. A conflict of interest would be included in this particular policy, and code of conduct. So this document could then serve to form part of the orientation and training program that I'm recommending a little bit further down. Do we want to stop after each one, or would you prefer?
Just keeping an eye on the council. So just stick up your hand if you have any questions, and we'll get through it all.
Okay. And then the third recommendation, the last recommendation in this section, is that council committee and commission, that the council committee and commission structure and associated governing documents be reviewed by council staff and the committees and commissions on an annual basis. So this is part of that orientation and training that I talked about, where they would, at the first meeting of their term, they would sit down and they would review their mandate, as well as council would make sure to review the mandate terms of reference and any establishing bylaw before they go out to the committee. Annual basis might be a little bit too onerous, so council may wish to consider biannual, but that's before you for consideration. So that's the end of those recommendations in that first section, the policy section.
Any questions? Okay.
Okay. So moving on to the recommendations around process. Recommendation number 4 is that the draft committee and commission minutes be made available and posted to the website within a specific time frame. So for example, 5 business days. I heard a lot of feedback that the minutes from the committees and commissions are not available until well after or just before the next agenda is being published a month later, so that when the application is before council, they don't have the opportunity to actually have the minutes in front of them. The draft minutes should accompany the application when it goes forward to council, in my opinion. They can also be posted to the website as soon as they've been drafted. They can be clearly marked as draft. There can be a disclaimer that says these minutes are not official until they've been adopted by the committee, but at least there's communication out there immediately after the committee or commission meeting as to the recommendations made by the committee or commission. And council would be then privy to that information as well.
You got a lot more nods on that one than you did on the policies and
Yeah,
orientation stuff, just for the record.
It's a little bit more exciting, maybe. Recommendation number 5 is that staff be requested to look into allowing committee or commission members to conduct site visits where applicable. So there's some instances where some members feel and would like to do a site visit. They're visual learners, and I completely understand that. So sometimes just reading a staff report or looking at a drawing doesn't make sense. So they like to actually go out to conduct a site visit. Staff would need to do some work to ensure that we are not, because there's some litigation potential harm on the property. If there's some property damage, we do have to look into to make sure that we're covered from a liability perspective, as well as to make sure that the committee members are protected as well in the event that something may happen while they're on site. So we would have to do some work to allow for those site visits to happen, but I'm recommending that actually take place. And we'd also have to look at whether or not, if we have to be careful, if a quorum of the committee or commission does appear on site together, it could be construed as it actually being a meeting. So we have to put some guidelines in place to allow for these site visits to happen.
Councillor Zelka?
Question through you, of course, to staff. With respect to the site visits done for uplands, quite often more than 3 or 4 councillors show up. how is it construed or misconstrued, or the construing managed during a site visit done today at the Uplands?
I think from staff's perspective, Your Worship, I think that the whole process needs a review. And while we're doing it for one group, really your advisory body is an extension of council, it won't be onerous to extend that lens to the entire process to take a good look. So again, we want to make sure there's transparency, meaning if there is a quorum, we have to address that issue. We want to make sure both councillors and advisory body members were protected on site. And we also want to protect the site, the property owner of the site where those people would be attending. So again, it's just taking a look at a practice that's been ongoing. But again, we want to take a fresh look at these things. So we'll be doing that, Councillor Zelka, through your worship.
Thank you. If I could just share a bit. We all attend UBCM, AVICC. We go out on various other conferences. We go out for dinner sometimes. It was made very clear, certainly to me, during council orientation and various other orientations that you do not talk about business ever. Especially if there are other councillors around, so as not to have the misconstrued aspect. So I guess I kind of appreciate that. There's I can see a lot of couched words. Look into, see where it's applicable, kind of like dancing around it, like we all dance around it. I mean, this is an issue that is there, and that we always have to be careful. And I think there's a level of trust that that we earn with the public and that we earn with each other to do what's appropriate. So I'm imagining you're going to have to go to a lawyer, and the lawyer's going to say, don't ever appear in public ever with anyone because of the number of angels that can dance on the head of a pin, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of practicalities, that just doesn't happen either in this. I can't see it happening in this local authority or others. So I would be, the only thing that concerns me about this is that there might be a charge or a cost associated with the looking into and the definition of what's applicable. Thank you.
No other comments? We can move on.
Recommendation number 6 is that the council procedure bylaw be amended to establish a time limit for all committee and commission meetings. Some of the feedback and some of my observations are that some of the meetings can go on quite lengthy, 3 to 5 hours in some cases. And this is really taking up a lot of time for your volunteer community members if this is happening on a monthly basis. So the council procedure bylaw currently states that if council or a committee is still still functioning as of 10:30, that or still in session as of 10:30, that it shall be adjourned unless otherwise determined by unanimous vote of those members present. So because a lot of the committees don't meet in the evenings, they meet in the afternoon, they're most likely not in session until 10:30 at night, so this doesn't really apply to them. So we may wish to amend the procedure bylaw to establish a time limit, perhaps a 2-hour time limit, and should the meeting go still be extending beyond 2 hours, by unanimous vote of all those members present, they could agree to extend the meeting for however long they wish to. Otherwise, the meeting would stand adjourned. So I'm recommending that amendment be implemented.
Yeah, Councillor Braithwaite.
Through you, Mayor Murdoch, would that mean for actual council meetings as well, that after 2 hours, so if we start at 7, at 9 o'clock, we'd have to have a unanimous decision to go past 9 o'clock?
Can we vote on that right now?
So the recommendation is primarily for committee meetings. So it would be very specific in the bylaw that it would apply to committee meetings. The way it currently stands in your bylaw is that you have until 10:30.
Yeah.
And then if you wish to change that to 2 hours, you can certainly do that when the procedure bylaw is amended. It's really up to council.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is it would be nice, I think, is in my opinion on this, the procedures bylaw is the place for it. It would be helpful, I think, as well to put into our procedures bylaw some guidelines for things like presentations and expected timelines, so that people showing up to a meeting have an expectation. They know they have, say, 5 or 10 minutes to present, and have more time for Q&A, just so that the expectation is set there. Because I've noticed there's a real range at both committee and at council, where some people show up and give a 2-minute presentation, and others will show up with a 30-minute presentation. And I think setting some of those expectations up front obviously with the bodies able to extend if they see fit, but just sort of sets those parameters and would probably help a lot with some of those timelines. Thank you.
Recommendation 7 is that staff undertake a review of how the tourism committee may be established so that it may manage the revenue received from the municipal and regional district tax. So the tourism committee is a select committee of council. It currently operates quite at arm's length and quite autonomously from the district. The only sort of support that the district provides is accounting support. So the hotels that exist in Oak Bay, they collect a 2% tax from all of its guests. They remit that tax to the provincial government, and the provincial government then remits those funds back to the District of Oak Bay. And it's those funds that are being used by the tourism committee to help promote Oak Bay as a destination. So right now we are providing some accounting support, but there might be an opportunity to revisit that structure to create a more independent structure to allow them to operate a little bit more independently. It would require that they would have to undertake and secure their own sort of accounting support or administrative support to assist with that committee, but it would alleviate the responsibility on behalf of Oak Bay. In addition, because they're not an independent entity, they also can't enter into contracts, and the District of Oak Bay has to do that on their behalf. So, so for example, they have secured a marketing company to assist them with the promotion of Oak Bay, and the district has had to enter into that contract on behalf of the tourism committee. So it would just allow them to operate a little bit more independently if we took a look at their structure.
Councillor Green, and then Braithwaite, and then
Just through you, Mayor, as a point of interest, the district also provides a council liaison. So there are two kinds of support, the financial and also the council liaison role.
Yeah. And it might very well be that council may still wish to appoint a council liaison just to have that connection and continuity back with council in the district.
Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So my question would be, if this recommendation were to be accepted, would that then mean that when the tourism committee does an activity, for example, the car show on the avenue, whether or not they would have to get their own insurance to cover that activity, or they'd still be able to be covered underneath the insurance of the municipality?
And I guess that would depend on how they're structured at the end of the day. But if they're their own independent, they might need to get their own insurance. But that's something that is to be determined still. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Ney.
I was just wondering, depending on the degree to which that might be restructured, would that have any implication with the arrangement we have with the province about the flow through of money to the municipality? As I understand it, it's quite a unique arrangement that we have, and so I'm just wondering to what degree would any changes occur that might have implication to that arrangement?
And that's a good question, and something that I don't know off the top of my head. So again, if we're directed to look into it further, that's something that we could look into to see how independently they could be structured, or if there still needs to be that tie back with the district.
Councillor Green.
Thank you. Through you, not to be too technical, but there is a difference between independence and delegated authority. So in fact, we could have a hybrid where we delegate certain authority but maintain a relationship.
That's possible.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I just have one question on this one. It seems odd. There's so much on this one. We touched it so little. But I guess that's sort of my question is, I don't have any great insight into how much this is desired by the committee or where it fits. So did this come out of their conversation or just
so
like, where is this coming from?
Again, this was one of those committees I just did a sort of a higher level review, and I did meet with the chair of the committee, and we did talk about this. And it wasn't something that it was discussed, but I can't say that it was something that they want to happen, or there was.
So a next step would be probably to just reach out and have a more thorough conversation if we'd be interested.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So recommendation number 8 is that the council liaison be requested to report back to the council committees and commissions the decisions made by council on matters previously considered by the committee or commission. So some of the feedback, it's a bit wordy, but some of the feedback I heard is that there didn't seem to be a bit of a closing of the loop of, you know, what happened at council and why did council choose a different, make a different decision than what our recommendation was. So just a little bit more of a structured way of reporting back and forth from the council liaison back to the committee, as well as from the committee to back to council.
Is there any possibility of us doing similar sort of draft minutes? Because that would obviously help if those liaisons, if they just had the minutes of the meetings to sort of take with them as they go in. We don't keep that much detail on them, but we do have, there is at least those pieces they can walk through to go through all relevant pieces. I know when I did liaison work, you'd often get lost. You'd forget about the meeting that you had 3 meetings. We had 3 meetings this week. It's easy to forget about some of the details when you're, so is that maybe something we might look at as well?
The possibility exists, Your Worship. We'll have to look at timing, but again, the refinement of these processes going forward is where this will really shake out, but we will be bringing that detail back.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Braithwaite?
And it does happen with Parks, Rec and Culture that those minutes are usually included into the next package of Parks, Rec and Culture, but that's because the meetings are a month apart, so.
Okay, thank you.
Recommendation number 9 is that staff be directed to develop and deliver an orientation or training session to each committee and commission on an annual basis. And so we've discussed that further, and this would be combined with recommendation number 2, the development of a policy around the functions of committees and commissions. Recommendation number 10 refers to the appointment and recruitment process, and there's 3 parts to it. The first is that staff review the appointment and recruitment process and establish a standard time of year for recruitment and appointments. B, that all members whose terms may be expiring but are still eligible to serve be required to reapply to the committee and commission. And C, that the current and future appointments to all committees or commissions be reviewed to ensure they reflect the membership requirements as outlined in the establishing bylaw in terms of reference. So with recommendation A, we talked about that earlier, about if we standardize the timing and the process, members of the public will be aware and they'll know when they should be looking into whether or not they wish to serve on a committee. Recommendation B, it's my understanding, but I stand to be corrected, that members who, so the most terms of reference or bylaws allow for a 2-year appointment, and they can be reappointed for a subsequent 2 additional terms, so in most cases up to 6 years in total. It was my understanding that those committees, when their terms were up but still eligible to serve, that they were automatically rolled over into an additional appointment if they wish to continue to serve. That might not necessarily be the case, but I'm recommending that when that 2-year term is up, that the member be required to reapply. This way, council can take into consideration any new applicants that might wish to stand on or serve on the committee or commission. And the recommendation C refers to just taking a look at all of some of the terms of reference and establishing bylaws set out specific membership, just to make sure that the members that are being appointed actually touch on all of those membership requirements. There's some feedback from some of the committees that they're lacking representation in some fields in some areas, so it would be a good idea just to have a more deliberate review of those membership requirements to make sure that they're meeting the terms of reference and establishing bylaw requirements. Recommendation 11, that the Director of Corporate Services be responsible for administrative oversight of the council committees and commissions. And so this is just going back to being there being some lack of oversight from a specific department. The Director of Corporate Services is the person responsible for corporate administration as set out in the community charter, and that individual is responsible for council. So it makes sense that they would also be responsible and have that direct oversight for committees and commissions, and just to ensure that proper meeting function and procedures are taking place and are being consistent across the board.
Councillor Zelka.
If you don't mind my interrupting with another question. Sure. With respect to, I guess going back to 10, for 10C, if say the Advisory Planning Commission, just using that just picking on them, why not? They lost their environmental designated person or their youth designated person, and say, you know, we were also maybe too close to quorum, or maybe even had lost quorum. Would you be proposing in 11 that the Director of Corporate Services find someone to replace or appoint someone, or would this have to come back to Council?
Definitely would have to come back to council. Council has the authority to make the appointments and to the committees and the commissions. So I would assume that a recruitment process would take place. So an ad would be put in the paper, application notice on the website. However, the district decides to proceed with their appointment and recruitment process.
So the last aspect, so admin oversight has nothing to do with the appointment or the vetting of the people necessarily, or the as mentioned in 10C, they're reflecting that they require the required membership requirements are certainly there. It's still a responsibility of council.
Absolutely, and the Director of Corporate Services would be responsible for ensuring that the appointment and recruitment process takes place at the same time each year. If there's vacancies, they would administer that process. They would collect the applications and make that information available to council. And recommendation 12 is that the council code of ethics apply to council committee and commission members. So council has a code of ethics that you approved a few years ago, I believe. It's not clear whether that code of ethics applies to the committee and commissions. So this is just a recommendation to be a little bit more direct and specific that the code of ethics also applies to the committees and commissions.
And that's our Appendix M, if anybody's looking for it in a very long report.
So the next set of recommendations are around structure. And this is where I expect there to be some discussion. And again, just keep in mind, these are recommendations, and your committees, how they are established and structured, it's really up to council. So this is just an opportunity or a vehicle to start that conversation. So the first recommendation...
Just before you start on this one,
Yeah.
is there anything else that sort of, from a procedure, policy point of view, or sort of first two sections down, this is going to take our time, because I think this is the meat and potatoes of the structure of things. Is there any other questions from council at this time that people want to talk to? Councillor Green?
Through you, to Ms. Santarossa, are you aware of any other municipalities that delegate their authority to appoint to staff?
No,
Or
because
it's always done by council,
the
isn't it?
legislation is very
Requires
specific
you,
about
yeah.
who may appoint, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So recommendation 13, the first section A is that council consider combining the Advisory Planning Commission and the Heritage Commission. And this is really based on, the Advisory Planning Commission had a number of canceled meetings last year. The Advisory Planning Commission and the Heritage Commission, they tend to send representatives to each other's meetings to observe and provide feedback back to their own committees. There's also cases or instances where the Heritage Commission or vice versa have wanted to refer an item to the other committee or commission for their feedback and input. So based on that, I'm recommending that council consider perhaps combining those two commissions, and that if that is the case, that staff be directed to make the necessary bylaw amendments to make that happen. Should council not choose to combine the Advisory Planning Commission and the Heritage Commission, I'm recommending also that there is some overlap between the mandate of the Heritage Commission and the Heritage Foundation. So it might be, if council chooses not to combine the two, it might be a good idea to do a little bit more of a thorough review of the mandates of those two other bodies to ensure that we minimize the overlap.
Thank you. It's probably worth just having a couple of questions here if there's any. Councillor Zelka?
Thanks. I much appreciate the opportunity again. And I appreciate how sort of informally we're doing this. So, and don't have to worry about too much about word choice. I'll just keep it respectful. With respect to if we did do this combination of these two bodies, is there anything that might be stopping it, or that we could potentially put into the bylaws that could allow that group, if they wish to split into two committees, so that if there was something that came along that was only APC with no heritage, they could actually amongst themselves set up something similar to an APC, or if there was something that was only heritage but not APC related, then the heritage aspect. But if there was something that was combined, then they could choose to do it together.
So I'm also recommending that rather than it being a commission, that it be set up as a select committee. So if that's the case, and if the terms of reference allow for the creation of a subcommittee, as we discussed earlier, there might be instances where they might want to form a subcommittee to look at a particular matter. But again, if the committee is establishing a heritage branch or an advisory planning branch, that they're consistently looking at matters on a regular basis, then council might wish to consider breaking them apart again and establishing their own individual committees. So it really does depend on the matters that are coming before the committee and how they're functioning.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. Councillor Ney?
I guess just with regards to the notion of combining the heritage with the APC, I mean, as I'm trying to think this through, I think what you're saying here in your recommendation is that there are times where the work of the commission and the APC seem to overlap. Would that be right, or?
Maybe not overlap so much as each of the commissions has felt that it would be advantageous for the other commission to provide comment on a particular application, because there's that land use aspect as well as that heritage aspect. So rather than the going back and forth and adding time to a process, if they served as one committee with that sort of overlapping mandates or a combined mandate, then you might accomplish something at one meeting versus it going to two separate bodies.
I could kind of see where you're going with that, because if we think of the Heritage Commission, and others of you at the council may be more conversant with the mandate, but that their focus is around preservation of heritage in the community, whereas when we move over to the APC, the considerations are about the way that heritage becomes integrated into land use decisions. So it's an integration rather than identifying, you know, the unique qualities that characterize what heritage is. So what I'm trying to say is that if Heritage Commission, if land use decisions in APC need to be informed by the views of the Heritage Commission that have some expertise, there would be value in that being quickly accessible is to the APC decision makers, is what you're saying. Yeah. And that by combining them, that may make that so. Yeah, okay. I just kind of trying to clarify where you're coming from and if that fits, that kind of thinking. Okay, thank you.
I have a request from Councillor Patterson via the vocal cords of Councillor Zelka.
Yes, from Councillor Patterson. I guess similarly to Councillor Ney, Heritage BC at the 2019 conference recommended that mandates be expanded to include tangible and intangible heritage, built and natural heritage, and inclusive heritage. The report does not seem to consider an expanded role such as this in terms of the I guess the evolution of heritage. So how would this expanded role fit with, for example, a combined committee?
Nice light question for you. That was very quickly typed, though. Well done. Ms. Santarossa.
If council feels that should be part of the mandate of whether they remain as separate committees or if they're a combined committee, then that's certainly something that could be included as part of the terms of reference or the bylaw, depending on how the committee or commission is structured. So the actual mandate is really up to council to determine.
Councillor Green? I'd ask a follow-up, but you can't follow up, so. Councillor Green?
I'm happy to.
Go ahead.
Through you to Ms. Santarossa, would it be possible to keep the committees separate, APC and Heritage, but then create a subcommittee that includes representatives from both of the committees to look at those applications that have commonality between the two bodies? And I'm just thinking out loud, but I'm thinking that that might be one way to address. I think originally the intent, because I was the chair of the Heritage Commission at the time, and Christina Leach was the chair of the APC at the time, our attempt to have representatives from each of the bodies attending our meetings was to improve communication and information sharing. But would it be possible for those two committees to, if they remain separate, to have a subcommittee that would accomplish that same thing, where they would have a role to jointly review an application that had features that were common to both committees, and then that subcommittee would bring back a recommendation to each of the two committees. So I'm just thinking out loud now, but that was one thought. Thank you.
Ms. Varela?
Absolutely. So one of the challenges before council as you move forward with how to augment your governance and decision-making process is balancing that with the timeline associated with the applications that these bodies are considering. So again, just putting that top of mind.
Thank you. That was my first thought. I thought, oh, how long? All these things take time, so we have to be, we have to be careful about that. Are there any other comments or questions? Councillor Ney?
Up on that comment from the CAO, and the recommendation to combine them would create the efficiencies that the CAO has just spoken to. Would that be so? Yeah. Okay.
That was the intent.
I'll just say my 2 cents. This is probably my least favorite of all the suggestions in the report. I think that there's a lot of overlap, but there's also a lot of very specific expertise on heritage and they do so many other things in terms of the educational, and they have all these other mandate pieces that I have a very hard time getting my head around that, and the very specialized expertise of the APC to kind of guide the broader picture. There needs to be heritage on the APC, but I struggle with this one. I'll be honest with that piece. And I have another shared
I guess
comment from
second
Councillor Patterson.
Councillor Patterson speech here. Yes.
Councillor Patterson with a deep voice.
Following on from some of your comments, Mayor, the role of Heritage Foundation doesn't fit with the combined APC Heritage suggestion. And shall I read out? There are some suggestions as to here's what the Heritage Foundation currently does in terms of granting $14,000. This is just in the last year. Granting of $14,000, 5 successful nominations to the Hallmark Heritage Society, 4 lectures with good resident responses, production and distribution of historical walking tour map, a repository for production and distribution of the Uplands Field Guide, the McCann one, assisting community newspaper with articles, newsletters to all properties listed on the Heritage Register, book plaque sales, assist with Heritage Week, social media platform, and I might add possibly reprinting the Stark book. Could that fall there as well? Okay, yes.
Ms.
I
Santarossa?
just wanted to clarify that it wasn't recommended that the Heritage Foundation be rolled up into this. The Heritage Foundation would remain a separate entity as it currently exists. This was just combining the Heritage Commission and the Advisory Planning Commission. Again, if council chooses not to go this route, I would recommend taking a look at the mandates for the commission and the foundation, because there does tend to be a little bit of overlap. As they've referred to it themselves, the Heritage Foundation, maybe I shouldn't say this publicly, but is the party group, because they put together the education series and whatnot, and then you have the commission, which pays, which funds those initiatives for the foundation.
Not quite the right thing piece, but you'll stick with that. Councillor Green?
I share Mayor Murdoch's feelings about this particular recommendation, that it may not be the best one for the work, the nature of the work that each of these do. And just for clarity, the APC at the moment, and I'm sorry I don't have the bylaw in front of me, are they doing all 3 things that you reference, land use, community planning, and proposed bylaws permits? Are they currently involved in all 3 of those areas?
I believe the bylaw does stipulate that, what they're actually doing, what matters they're actually considering. I'm not entirely, I can't speak to that because I haven't been to a number of their meetings, but I certainly believe that the bylaw itself does lay that out.
Because if not, and we look at expanding their role to cover those 3 components, then I think it you know, it wouldn't make sense to combine them with heritage at that point. But that's just an observation that I have, because I have served on an APC in another community as well. And anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Oh, Councillor Zelka, are you this time?
I am me this
Okay.
time. Yes, this is from Councillor Zelka. Through you to staff. I'll pick on the APC again. I've listening to our Ms. Varela at the beginning talking about the IAP2 framework with respect to this advisory body. I know the Advisory Planning Commission has the word advisory in it, but I noticed in the existing terms of reference there's a number of rather initiating elements within there. Such as develop policies and initiatives that promote a whole number of things, create measures of progress towards a whole number of things, propose amendments to the official community plan. Basically these terms of reference are telling them to do things. Now, unfortunately, that didn't seem to happen, just to be honest, looking at the last 4 years. I didn't get a sense that many of those things were coming from that group. The sense I more got was that the group was waiting for us to ask for those sorts of things. So could you give me a flavor for how we're supposed to work something like this with respect to the advisory aspect and the IAP2, where they're just advising things? Do they wait for us to act, such as a working group that has a specific mandate, or can they self-initiate, which is what I thought commissions would do, such as, Parks, Rec, and Culture have been amazing. They've almost initiated too much, shall we say.
Ms. Varela?
Your Worship, so I know Ms. Santarossa will leap in here, but I think one of the things that's added to the confusion around roles and responsibilities is how information flows. So really, the directive should come from the council table to your advisory bodies, and they make recommendations back to council. As Ms. Santarossa mentioned in her initial report out, is the idea that subsequent work plans that don't align with strategic priorities or budgets or things like that are adding to some confusion and maybe expectations that aren't aligned. So again, part of this process is to say, how do we make the best use of the committees and commissions' time, staff time, and augment your council decision making?
Thank you. That's helpful. I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
I just wanted to add, with respect to the Advisory Planning Commission, the legislation is specific in that it does have the authority to work on those broader policy issues as outlined in the bylaw that are referred to it by council. So perhaps there's been an absence in some of those broader policy issues being referred to the Advisory Planning Commission so that they could work on those.
Fascinating. I much appreciate the perspective on that. I thought the terms of reference themselves were clear enough to ask them to. Although I must admit that as a body, and I'm sure when we go forward, the new bodies that are going to come forward will take some time to get themselves established. But I definitely look forward to some clarity on not only the roles of what the committees and commissions are supposed to do, but in terms of how we're supposed to direct them. In a good way to ensure that we get some good response back. I think, for example, of the Advisory Planning Commission, I think I'm still waiting to see the procedures manual, for example, of that body. It's been 5 years and it still hasn't come forward. I heard it was nearly done about 4 years ago. Wondering how that would potentially help me at least understand my role in terms of how I can interact with this body, but maybe that was something that was supposed to come from us, where we gave it to them. I wasn't quite sure. So thank you for clarifying that aspect to some extent.
At the end of the day, it's always good for us to remember it's our duty to manage, or not to manage it, but to take responsibility. And I think there's been a general feeling here that the expertise on the Advisory Planning Commission has been underutilized, and so how do we make better use of that is a core question. I have a question that Councillor Zelka's spurred me, and I forgot I had it in my other notes in a different pile here. But it really relates to this, like in terms of, we don't always know what we don't know to give those references to. And there is the option within, within our improving, strategic planning process, work plan process, and that part of it, to create a part of that is sharing it with the committees and commissions, which I think you've highlighted is really important, so that there's a alignment of priorities. But the other of that is there any thought from a process of providing the mechanism by which maybe on an annual or biannual basis that we task a process for those bodies and commissions to maybe come back to us with what they see as their priorities for approval by council, and they can go and take those on as projects, sort of standalone projects on their own. I think there's sometimes things there that we would still have to approve that, but they may not be aware of things that they see as priorities that we may not have thought of, because we're busy doing 1,000 other things, honestly, with a lot of meetings. So I'm not sure if that's thought of through as a process.
So what I'm envisioning as part of the sort of annual orientation and review of the mandate, it would be at that opportunity or at that time that the committee or commission could, if they so choose, they could develop a work plan, or they could make recommendations to perhaps revise or amend their mandate or terms of reference based on what they feel would work better, and it would then go back up to council for approval. So they're not developing their own individual work plans, and they're going off and doing what they would like to do. They are making that recommendation back to council. Council would then have another opportunity to ensure that those new initiatives align with your strategic plan and objectives, and that you have the resources to actually implement any work that comes out of these new initiatives. So there is that opportunity for the committee or commission to provide their feedback and identify new things that council may not be aware of. But again, it should always go back to council for that final approval to ensure that that alignment continues.
Okay, thank you. And we should probably, Councillor Green?
I'll be brief. Through you, one of the things that the Heritage Commission started was an annual report at the end of each year, and I know I, as a councillor now, would appreciate at the end of each year the chairs of each of the committees coming to council and doing a very brief presentation, 5 minutes, just to highlight their year's work, the things that were the sort of high mark events, and that kind of thing. I think that would be one helpful thing if they could come every year and report out in a sense. But it wouldn't have to be anything complex or long, because we've heard the mayor clearly he doesn't want long. So anyway, just a thought.
Yes, Councillor Patterson?
From Councillor Patterson, using the HCA Heritage Conservation Area as an example, where staff requested help drafting the statement of significance, the task required adequate resources that may not exist if the numbers were reduced on a combined committee. That's a concern, obviously.
Thank you. That doesn't really require a response, I don't think. I think it's just recognition that there's, again, I think what we want those bodies to do is, and this is my own, by I think reflecting it, is that Heritage provides a great deal of specific expertise that we rely on quite heavily as a council to sort of understand the heritage pieces and the APC's more broader spectrum. So with that expertise with others in our land use planning pieces, but that's for this body to decide. Councillor Zelka?
From me, if I may, just wanted to get a flavor for maybe a potential direction that we might be going with some of the suggestions. With respect to the role of the council liaison, is there an assumption that the messaging and the flow of information would flow through the council liaison to the committee and commissions and then back up to council? Or are you more suggesting that we would have to have formal motions at all times being sent down and then formal reports coming back up? Like how do you see this information flow happening, number one? And number two is, what about those commissions that don't have a council liaison, or maybe there's not a functioning council liaison, or does that mean the mayor is the ex officio and is a responsible one here? Just in terms of the information flow.
I notice you won't look at me when you say that. Ms. Santarossa.
So in terms of direction to the individual committees or commissions, if you're wanting them to undertake an initiative or do some additional work or tackle some broader policy issues, I would recommend that there be some sort of formal motion made by council to refer this matter to the Heritage Commission, for example, to review X, Y, and Z. With respect to the information flow, which is more general in terms of what happened at council and vice versa, I see that as a little bit more informal and just a verbal sort of communication with the council liaison back and forth to council and the committees. But where you're requiring or requesting a committee or commission to undertake some work, I would recommend a motion made by council to direct that work.
Councillor Green?
Yes, and just a quick comment about that. I think councils sometimes tend to make referrals without clear guidance and direction, and sometimes we ourselves don't know exactly what it is we want. So, sometimes, but really, I think we have a responsibility to be very clear and bring clarity to that referral process. And I think we all try to do that, but I think by doing what you have suggested, that's a reminder to set out clear expectations. Thanks.
Thank you. It's always fascinating to me, and I really appreciate the way you've laid out this discussion, because we all talk about policies and guidelines, and as soon as you get to a specific, then you start becoming real about what they actually mean on terms of things. So this is a good example of one where just by talking about the specifics of these commissions, where it forces us to think about what our policies and procedures actually mean in the real world on these things. So we should probably get to other recommendations so then we can get to the public and have a more in-depth conversation. Oh, sorry. One more, Councillor Patterson.
One more for Councillor Patterson. Is there a role for the chairperson in relaying information back from council or to council? From council. As opposed to
The liaison.
the council liaison doing it.
Yeah.
That is assuming that the chair of the committee or commission can attend the council meeting or watch the webcast to be able to listen to the discussion and convey that information back to the committee or commission. But I see the role of the council liaison as that person to do that.
Hard enough to get people to serve as chairs on these things, and not already without forcing them to go to every council meeting. It would be just cruel. All right,
Okay.
please continue.
Moving on to recommendation number 14. So the first part is that council consider dissolving the Parks, Recreation and Culture Commission and reestablish it as a select committee of council. And if so, that staff be directed to make the necessary bylaw recommendations. So the Parks, and just to give some history, the Parks, Recreation and Culture Commission was established back in 1975. And this was sort of on the heels of the Canadian Centennial, where there was a large capital program to build a number of recreation facilities across the province. And it was perhaps during that time, I was a little young at the time, so I'm not, and lived in another province, so I'm not entirely sure, but at the time, perhaps there are a lot of parks and recreation departments did not have enough staff to actually deal with the operations, the day-to-day operations and maintenance of these recreation facilities. So in a lot of cases, parks, recreation and culture commissions were established by local governments, and they were delegated significant authority to manage those day-to-day operations and the programming. And this was to supplement the staff that they did not have within their local governments. The current Parks, Recreation and Culture Department here at Oak Bay has grown over the years, and you have about 75 full-time staff with about 250 part-time auxiliary staff. And so the day-to-day operations is really being done by those staff members. So there seems to be a bit of an overlap in the authority that the Parks Commission currently has right now. That overlaps and perhaps might be in conflict with the authority and the responsibilities that your staff currently have within the department. So council may wish to consider dissolving the commission as it currently stands, but perhaps creating or establishing a select committee, again made up of community members, that would perhaps focus on significant or specific initiatives rather than a more broader general authority over that particular function.
Thank you. Nice to know you're not afraid of, or not going to shy away from controversial ideas on these ones. So, is there any discussion on this item? Councillor Braithwaite?
Being as I'm the Parks and Recreation and Culture liaison, I actually totally agree with this suggestion. And based on everything that, I think I'm getting Councillor Patterson's disease. So Councillor Appleton, you may have to speak for me soon. So that would be impossible. That's right. So I was really pleased to see this one come forward, because I do think that this would be a move in the right direction, and to have then a select committee to work on things like the Parks Master Plan would be, I think, the next best thing, and the next reiteration of what the Parks Rec and Culture committee or commission could look like. So thank you for bringing this one forward.
Councillor Zelka, speaking for himself.
On the other hand, I was wondering if whether either the mayor or possibly staff can let me know regarding the return rate that this Parks Rec and Culture Commission returns in terms of the cost to the public compared to almost every other Parks Rec and Culture Commission in terms of other local authorities. Are we in the top 5 or the top 10 across British Columbia? Or how are we doing these days compared to the others? I understand we're pretty high.
Councillor Braithwaite.
We're actually number 1 for being the best as far in the whole province. But it's not, I would say that it's not because of our Parks, Recreation and Culture Commission. It's because of our staff. So I would say that the commission has very little, if anything, to do with it whatsoever. I think that one of the things that you would look at in the Parks, Recreation and Culture Commission is that inevitably at every meeting that we have, there's at least 5 or 6 staff members that are sitting around that table for 2.5, 3 hours, however long the meeting is, and there's a high that's a high cost to the municipality to have those staff members sitting around that table. But I would say that the commission members themselves have nothing to do with the user pay rate, I think it's called, of the Parks, Rec and Culture Department.
It is hard to allocate credit on those things for sure. Councillor Zelka.
Well, thank you for allowing us to collectively pat the Parks, Rec and Culture Commission and Corporation and the staff especially for being number 1 in all of British Columbia at lack of cost to the public in terms of the user pay rate. And I certainly would not want to. I think there's that expression, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and we've got one heck of a baby here. So yeah, let's maintain that somehow. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship, through you. And I think this is a question for our staff. I think that it's in place. If we consider the recommendation here, that it's implied that staff have at least shown an indication that whatever delegated responsibility in the decision-making authority that currently rests with the commission, that they can take on that work, essentially that they can adopt that work, and that it's not going to have any implications on their workload in and of itself. So they've at least sort of signaled their ability to accommodate that change in structure, because I get the sense that it's already functioning, that they're in terms of budgeting and sort of the larger scale work planning, that the staff do that already. And so just to confirm.
Staff are actually anticipating it would actually streamline the process. As Councillor Braithwaite referred to, we're estimating for commission and committee meetings between 5 and 10 hours per staff person by the time you do the run-up to the meeting, the meeting itself, and afterwards. So if you start to multiply that out, it's a lot of valuable staff time that goes towards these meetings, and there's a lot of valuable time by the members as well. And so council's balancing act is how you best shake that out. But staff absolutely feel they can continue on with their work. Council would be observing the trends over time to see if there was any change in that return rate or user numbers or any of those things. So again, you would be looking at this over the longer term to see how this is shaking out. And at any time, council retains the prerogative to do something different.
Councillor Green and then Councillor Braithwaite again.
Through you, Mayor, just quickly, if you know, not to put you on the spot, but what are other communities doing in terms of recreation commissions, just for the general information of the public? I don't want to quote what I understand because I'm not current, but I just wondered if you might have that available. Thank you.
I have a listing here of across the province, and I'm not sure how, I think it's within the last few years, but there's about, out of 35 that were canvassed, 4 have commissions, 8 have committees, and there's a number of local governments that don't currently have a Parks and Recreation committee or commission of sorts. Now, again, this is a few years old, so with the election, things could have changed, but it's not really, the need for a commission in this particular instance isn't perhaps necessary as it was perhaps back in the 70s when it was first established.
Thank you.
Councillor Braithwaite, then nay.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I think one of the parts that we would want to have oversight on, because Parks, Rec and Culture has the largest budget within a municipality, is that's where I think we would have a public input would be around the budgeting process, and that to me would be really important because it's good to have that public lens around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nay.
I guess just the other consideration beyond efficiencies that could come out of the about dissolving the commission is the idea of how the community is engaged with this program. And I was just thinking this through in terms of parks, how much engagement we have with our community. And I put a little list here together that for parks alone, you've got the Friends of Uplands Park, the Bowker Initiative, the Monteith Plant Group, the Allotment Garden Group, the Native Plant Group, the Bowker Creek Walkway Group, the Henderson Hill Group, the Trafalgar Park Group from Margaret Jenkins, the Community Association and all the trees. We've got Camas Day, we've got Tree Appreciation Days, we've got people coming over from UBC and forestry. I mean, I guess what I was just trying to put in my head is that, if council does move in this direction, I don't think what's going on is that we're saying that the community and volunteers aren't still connected with this programming, but they are very much so. And we're really, really fortunate to have staff that have done an unbelievable job in engaging our community and very much involving them in the programming of our parks. So,
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Zelk?
Thank you, Chair. So I see where this recommendation is coming from, and I understand what it's trying to do. So I get that. I just have some real worries here, since I've heard one of the justifications is to save money because of the cost, and yet we have the lowest user pay rate. We are number one already in cost and efficiencies across the province. So why are we trying to fix something that doesn't appear to be broken? I have to think that out loud. I do also note that in its current form, this commission does have some ability to initiate activities on its own, as evidenced by the list just read out by Councillor Ney, amongst others. Plus, for example, we wouldn't be doing so well on the care-up reports with respect to our carbon neutral aspects. If the Parks, Rec and Culture Commission, or some of the staff in particular, some of the retired staff who are now, I guess, essentially volunteers, hadn't done so much work of their own initiative. So one thing that worries me is that if we remove that initiative, that we might break, a wheel might fall off this wonderful vehicle. So I worry about that out loud, that if we break the initiative, that we're going to have a problem here. So the suggestion is, or the question is, through you maybe to staff, is how will we keep this group self-initiating incredible innovative ideas like they are today, if it's a committee? Thank you.
Ms. Rella?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think I don't want to speak for Ms. Santarossa, but my understanding of this is that these would be, the committee would be initiative focused. So if council decided it wanted the committee to focus on a product or initiative, council would provide that direction. So rather than the broad oversight and delegated authority that the commission currently has, you would rely on your staff more for the operations, and you would focus community effort on things like a parks master plan or some other example that council may come up with. Again, these are recommendations only for council's consideration.
Councillor Braithwaite?
And I think, through you, Chair, I think that the lengthy list that Councillor Ney spoke of actually has nothing to do with the Parks, Rec and Culture Commission. Those are all community-driven organizations. Yes, they have some parks support, but that, again, has nothing to do with the commission. And I would like to reiterate that, in my humble opinion, the commission has nothing to do with what the level of user pay is. The commission is more so to do with talking about things like tree bylaws and Carnarvon Park Master Plan and things like that. I don't think that they really have anything to do with the user pay ratio, in my humble opinion, and I think that that's really from staff, and that's more staff driven. I think really the bottom line is that in its current form, this commission actually has a lot of delegated power that was initiated back, as was mentioned, in 1975. That power is actually not needed at this time because we have the staffing now that can do that without having this commission there to have that power. So to me, it makes more sense to be able to take a step back, get rid of the commission as it stands, and do things like have committees coming together to look at a playground plan, parks master plan, things like that. So really more specific.
Thank you for sharing, Councillor Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think one other point that I'd like to make from a staff perspective is that when we talk about hours spent at meetings, whether it's the commission meeting or other meetings, that's really about allocation of workforce. So what we have to look at, or council has to consider, is the value for those hours. So it's not necessarily a dollar equation as much as it is there a better way to use that staff time? So just a point I wanted to add for council's consideration.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Green, go ahead.
One last comment. This discussion that we're having currently reminds me of a principle that we all must be reminded of, and that's the difference between operations and policy. And I think if we create a policy committee, and we're not saying we aren't going to have a volunteer body working with Parks, Rec, and Culture, what we're saying is we're changing the format so that we can reduce the workload for staff, because they are precious resources, and provide a more task-oriented, focus-driven committee on special projects. But it is always I'm always mindful that we have to be very careful that we don't cross the line as committees and commissions into operations, and that we stay in the policy realm, just as council has to do. So that's all.
Thank you. I do want to get through these, so we have it by 8:30. I'd like to get to the public, just out of respect for their time. And we just have a few more to go, so do that. But I will throw my 2 cents on this one. I don't have an issue with the general recommendation on this one. I think it's going to need a bit more teasing out of what that really looks like. And I am very heartened by the amount of effort the staff has. And it's interesting, if you dig through the numbers, our costs are not lower. Our ability to draw people into our facilities is top notch, and that's been an incredible effort made to focus on maintenance of equipment and of buildings so that they're attractive and welcoming. The attention to detail in all the summer programs and all the activities that go on, and it's we really are blessed with a fantastic staff and a good culture there to draw that. There are still pieces, I think, where the decision was made when the foundation of the recreation, the main rec center, and has continued, which is not to be sort of performance oriented, but to be community oriented. So the pool wasn't a 50-meter pool; it was a 25-meter pool. Those sorts of things to kind of make it as a community. And I think it's important for us not to lose sight of the fact that we still need that community view of things. And I think the staff do a fantastic job of that, and the nuance of where that is. The only thing that's catches my eye a little bit on this is one, is there a additional role that might be played, perhaps of almost like a heritage foundation where there's an arts and culture or an arts and sports foundation that actually goes out and is part of the community and actually sort of fundraises and helps sort of drive some of the things. We're talking about it now with the playground fundraising, but if there's other aspects that maybe do that, and the other piece is just we've added culture to the Parks Rec and culture, and that is, we have the arts committee, which is still very active, and I think, what's that liaison look like from an oversight perspective? That's sort of still at the back of my mind. They wouldn't report through here, so what that looks like, and maybe an expanded role as they might look at more performance arts and things that we're also doing through the rec center that are arm's length currently from that body. So those are my just sort of musings as we go forward on this one. Ms. Santarossa?
Okay. Recommendation 15 is that council consider establishing a finance committee as a select committee of council following completion of the 2020 budget cycle and review of associated deliverables, and that staff be directed to draft the necessary terms of reference. So the idea is that it would be comprised of 2 members of council and perhaps 2 members of the community that would serve to take a look at things like how to perhaps improve reporting for members of the public or for council. And it would follow the 2020 budget cycle. And I also understand, though, that you also have a new director of finance that is beginning shortly. So the timing of this might be dependent on that.
Thank you, Ms. Santarossa. And yes, I think this is probably mine and perhaps Councillor Patterson's desire to have this. But I also recognize that with the arrival of Mr. Payne as a director of finance in just a few short weeks, this seems appropriate that we talk to him and get and understand what that is. But I believe there is a necessity for some, just I guess for those in the audience, we've tried to change our sort of budgeting approach to take it more related, or budget related to our strategic priorities and bring it up a level so that council is considering our intended goals and attaching budgets to those goals, so that we're not caught in the weeds and not taking the big picture view. However, there still is a need for the weeds a little bit, and so this is really related to that. Is like, how are we doing our fiduciary responsibility to, maybe not as a whole body, but as a subcommittee or something, to just do some of that work and report back. So I don't know what that would look like, and I would like to talk to Mr. Payne about what he would make some recommendations on. But for Councillor Patterson, this is one area that she would love to speak to. Do you want to have someone read something at this point? I think we can. This is something that will come back. I don't think this will drop off, and perhaps this can be a sidebar discussion with Mr. Payne when he arrives, and we can have a look at that with staff. Councillor Patterson, do you want to add anything? You can whisper quietly into the microphone. No. Okay. We're just discussing it at the moment anyway, so we can come back to that. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you, Chair. So I like where this is going, and I understand that it would be in particular quite active probably around auditing time and financial statement time and things having to do with finances. But it's the other times that I wonder what this committee would be used for, whether it would go into sort of low power mode or something like that. So with respect to that, I'm wondering, why not a management committee that has a financial component, or maybe something that can that could have a application across throughout the year. A subset of council that of course includes the mayor. Just wanted to just brainstorm about that. Why not a management committee? Are we too small?
I can't answer the question. I don't know what a management committee is, so maybe you can articulate a little bit more.
I apologize. Coming from Toronto, I just assume everybody knows. Come on. As my hometown is the maybe of course because they have 50 members, or used to have 50 members on council, now it's down to 25. It's a hard beast to manage. So having an executive committee or a management committee to basically help direct and flow some of the rather initiatives that need to sometimes move forward, and then come up with sort of maybe stick aspects of some of the initiatives that could then help to be fleshed out, and help a little bit more with that interplay between staff and council in terms of the work that needs to happen. As you know, one of the things we'll be doing, or trying to do this mandate, and that might hopefully not flow into the next, we'll get it finished, is to redo all of our policies. That's a lot of work to be done. And for us to do it all here in committee, could maybe we need a working group. Call it a management committee. just like you have a finance committee, which is effectively a working group. That's just an idea.
Sure. I certainly see from what I would see those kind of work as working groups taking on specific tasks, but I'm not sure. I'll put it back to Ms. Santarossa and Ms. Varela with that description. Is there a thing like a management group that you considered as part of this piece?
I have heard of executive committees, for example. Those are typically made up of all council members. What's being suggested here is a combination of council and members of the community. So I don't know if you were suggesting that perhaps members of the community also be part of the management committee. There could be other standing committees or other committees that sometimes there have been corporate services committees that have been established that consider HR matters or financial matters. It really is dependent on what council wants. So anything is workable. There's no real blueprint for what committees should be established. It really is dependent on the community and the organization and the wishes of council.
It's funny, I was thinking about that, where I've seen a lot of little committees doing a lot of work as in very small boards and at the small administrative staff, not so much committees, but on boards where they're get much more involved in operations, or very, very large, like Toronto, where they're so big they essentially have an office of the mayor with things that are, a lot of things flow through. We're not, I think, at either end of that scale, so it's interesting to have this. This is a great thing to raise forward because it's things I had never thought of before. So thank you, Councillor Patterson, via the vocal cords of
Before
Councillor
I start
Zelka.
talking as Councillor Patterson, just to finish up, I'm not proposing a Privy Council or an Office of the Prime Minister, but why not? Office of the Mayor, sure. Councillor Patterson is suggesting 2 points here. Finance Committee role would be to review data, financial reports, and make recommendations based on information received from the CFO. Improve confidence and transparency in reporting and decision-making at Council. I don't feel, says Councillor Patterson, that should wait for the 2020 budget cycle. End of first point. Second point is agreed decisions can be deferred for input to the new CFO. Any questions?
Nope, I don't have any questions for that. Moving on to recommendation 16.
This is an either or, and so this is based on the council motion that was approved back in April of this year, that where council declared a climate emergency and worked towards the goal of carbon neutrality in 2030, and that the district incorporate revised carbon neutrality goals into the 2020 and subsequent year strategic plans. So based on that, there's a recommendation that council establish an environment committee as a select committee, or if council chooses not to appoint or establish a committee, that the governing documents of all committees and commissions be amended to include a review of all matters from an environmental lens, so that the terms of reference or the mandate would have a specific reference to taking a look at all of the matters before those individual committees from an environmental lens. So this is an either or for council's consideration.
Thank you. And I will just make a point on this one because I think it's worth noting. I think we should do the second one of those two anyway. But given that declaration and the needs that we have, I think I've had some thoughts on this, and I appreciate Councillor Appleton and Councillor Green sort of bouncing ideas off of me a little bit. I think we're looking at perhaps doing a short-term working group model where we go there and just drive something that can inform our next strategic priorities, and that would then allow us to do a bit more sort of thoughtful approach to the broader questions, so that we can do something short-term first and then do that. So I didn't want to raise that formally really until we sort of get through this and have a look at what we're doing, but I might look at this as a reasonable idea, but it probably needs a short-term punch to start, and then we can review basically based on our strategic priorities what's the best way of fulfilling those, whether that's a environment committee or some other, another working group or some other aspect. So that's sort of, I'm just saying that out loud because it hasn't been talked about really publicly, but I think that's sort of my thinking right now and the intention of forming a short-term working group to accomplish that as part of our strategic priorities. But put that out to the rest of council at this point, or committee. Councillor Green? Or Councillor Appleton?
Well, I was just, as I understood it, we're still in the question period. So are deliberations coming? Do we deliberate on this now or later?
We can do it later if you wish.
Okay.
we're a little informal. I do want to. I'm trying to keep it. We're almost at the end, but we're trying to keep it within 7 minutes so that the public have a chance to speak as well. Anyone else? You sure? Okay. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of as a member of the Climate Caucus, I'm absolutely interested in seeing something happen sooner instead of later. If it ends up being a third option where we do something like a working group short term, great. And then it sort of cool down into something that has a B option. Whether it's a standalone committee or it's a working group, it doesn't really matter to me as long as we do more. Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Braithwaite.
I would agree with what your comments were, that we should be doing B right away, no matter what, but that it would be better perhaps to do something smaller in the interim to get a better idea of what we want to do for the larger in the future, because I think that we will need to have a much better consideration of what an environmental committee might look like.
And just from a process perspective, let's go through this piece, and if that's the will of the committee and council, then we could look to bring back terms of reference for something in a short term in the next meeting or two. Then we could do that quite quickly, I think. Not from a committee perspective, but from a working group type model. Councillor Patterson.
And 1 point from Councillor Patterson. For clarification on B up there, how would documents be drafted until the environmental task has established recommendations? And the environmental task force has established recommendations. How would the documents be drafted? In terms of reference documents?
Oh, you're talking about the governing documents for other terms of things? I don't know that has to be done immediately in any case, but I think there's in many ways, when she said that, my thinking of this was just that the terms of reference essentially include that they all consider the impact on greenhouse gases and environment as part of the decision-making pieces and recommendations. All right, we can, Councillor Santarossa.
And it could also be that the membership include a member who represents the environment community or that perspective.
Okay. Thank you.
Almost towards the end. Recommendation 17 is that staff be directed to review the consolidated bylaw 3545, which is the uplands regulation bylaw, make recommendations to clarify design guidelines for the uplands. So some of the feedback that I had heard is that while the guidelines are very flexible and allows for sort of more flexible decision making, with more specific guidelines, it may help to guide development in the uplands. So that recommendation is put forward for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. And I'm very supportive of this recommendation. As council liaison to the advisory design panel, and a case in point that we had this week, I think it's important to bring more clarity to that body and to the work that they do, and they do a really good job. But I think we need certainty for developers, and we need more certainty for neighborhoods and the community generally, and for council as well, because when something is vague, then we have to go through some kind of struggle sometimes on more complex matters. So I'm very supportive of this recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Ney.
Just follow up. I agree with Councillor Green on this matter, but just a follow up and a point of clarity around what design guidelines mean specifically. So would that have to do with footprint and massing of development up in the uplands, or is that under a separate bylaw? That would be under this? Yeah.
Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. So not having the Director of Planning here, I'm not going to address that particular question, but I will get back to you on that, Councillor Ney. I think one of the things that I'd like to point out from a staff perspective is this one of those things that would likely have significant impact on the department work plan. And when we say staff may be synonymous with a consultant or other expertise here. So we haven't considered this in the context of the current work plan and Council's mandated strategic priorities. So we will come back to you with more information if Council is interested in going down this path.
Councillor Zelka, are you speaking for yourself?
I'm speaking for myself this
right.
time. I like the suggestion. I have a request of staff, slightly operational. I made this request 4 years ago, and unfortunately it still has not been fulfilled. Could we please have a copy of the Oak Bay Special Powers Act available on the website? There are links. It is referenced all over the website, and there are apparent links, but unfortunately they go only to our bylaws. And I have noted that we've had people come to proponents come to council, claiming they did not know what was in that act. When I search BC laws, I actually can't find it. I had to actually go to the library and open the book and photocopy it directly from the book, since it doesn't seem to be available online. So I hope staff is
We have it here as Appendix C, so perhaps we can find a way to make that a public document.
And
it's probably not
easier
searchable.
available on the website. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Councillor Green?
I just wanted to speak to Councillor Nay's question about the advisory design panel, and in fact, they do have a checklist that they use when they're working with an application, and some of those things relate to massing and shadowing and overlook and height and those kinds of issues. So there is some consideration, and I believe the checklist is available on the website for the advisory design panel. Thank you.
I think you'd have lots of support for this. I think it's important that this be done, though, in conjunction with reconsideration of the bylaws for RS 1 and 2, which the majority of the uplands, because what happens right now is the bylaws allow for very, very large buildings, and the guidelines talk to the reduced massing, and there's a disconnect there where the rights of the owner on the zoning side of it. So I think the guidelines in many ways are actually quite effective, but they butt up against the reality that when people are trying to build to the maximum allowed by the bylaws, they're not always congruent. And I think that this piece is not, on its own, is probably not a lot of help unless we actually tackle the RS1, RS2 bylaw itself. That would give, so the zoning actually does a better job of containing the massing that's expected in those zones, because that's really the piece that most developers go to first is that zoning piece. But that's my 2 cents on that. Anything else, Councillor Zelka?
No, I absolutely echo your suggestion there, and wondering whether we need to formally recommend a change to this recommendation to include that aspect, since design guidelines without the zoning would be totally ineffective and not enforceable.
We'll get to some discussion on next steps after we have public input and a bit more discussion. Ms. Varela, anything else you wanted to add?
Just that those discussions have to be done in conjunction with the Director of Planning as well. So again, this is the public's first look at this document, and again, not into those fine details, but we would bring back subsequent reports at Committee of the Wholes for further council consideration as well as public input.
I think I would also like this would be something we'd probably bring back to strategic priorities, because it's not a simple thing to go changing, zoning bylaws at that scale. So I just, but I just, from a practicality perspective, I think it's a requirement to address this. Recommendation 18. Dare I say it?
That the administrative support to the Heritage Foundation be reviewed. So currently they hire their own admin assistant to prepare their agendas and their minutes. They rely heavily on archival staff for the research that they do and the work that they do. They also, because they don't have a designated support person here at Municipal Hall, they do create their own sort of documents and brochures and posters, and we want to make sure that those comply, because it's an Oak Bay committee or foundation. We want to make sure that complies with the Oak Bay standards as well as our records management policies and procedures. So I'm just recommending that we review the support for the Heritage Foundation and determine if there's some assistance that can be provided from the Municipal Hall to the foundation.
Yeah, thank you. I think that it probably makes a lot of sense. Part of that, not having that, is that there's been, as people change, the consistency of the minutes and things has varies quite a lot over the time, and there's also we have some skill sets in house now that we didn't have before in terms of communications and things that might be, even if it's a small amount, might be very helpful for some of these things to do that. So, okay. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Zelka?
I am reminded of one of the reasons why I left Toronto, that when the city was amalgamated from the 6 smaller cities into one mega city, the very, very first thing that was done by the brand new council was to fire every single volunteer. And all committees and commissions went from costing hardly anything to costing a massive amount of money. And all of the apparent savings of that efficiencies were completely lost. Not that I'm being reminded of that here, but I worry that if we bring in, obviously we have to take care of succession planning. We have to take care of basic corporate needs. But you could say this is the party group. This is a group with the joie de vivre. This is a group that attracts a lot of volunteers and does a lot of amazing work. I would not want that stamped out or in any way, since it brings so much to Oak Bay. So
Fair
again,
enough. I just want to point
some
out
of my concerns.
No, that's good. I would point out that in fact they actually do pay themselves for a person to come in and take the minutes. So it's not a free position currently, and I think also if there's I believe they do. Am I wrong on that one? I think they do. Yeah, and they looking to the audience randomly, just people out there who know more than I do, and the other side of this, if we can make we already provide support services for Heritage Commission, and that's maybe a logical extension. Ms. Vrella?
So it's my understanding that the intention behind this recommendation is actually to augment the Heritage Foundation to give them more capacity. There's no inference of stamping out. It's really how can you assist this valuable work?
Actually, that's much more important than the points I was making. Thank you. Yes. Okay, we're 8:35. I just would like to give a chance for members of the public to come forward and speak to us, because as we get into this conversation, we need to have all that information brought forward as well. And I don't imagine we're going to get to full recommendations by the end of tonight. And if possible, I think we definitely want to finish by 10 and ideally by 9:30 if we can. So we'll just invite anybody from the public who wishes to come and address us to please come forward.
Your Worship, could we just have a quick recess prior to public engagement, and the gentleman at the mic could just have a seat? Do you mind a few minutes?
Nope, that's fine. It was just a quick 3-4 minutes, and we'll come back to the table. Thank you. Okay. We'll take all the staff and all the councillor back at here, so we'll call, we would never really officially recess, but welcome all back. And we have our first member of the public. Welcome. If you just, for the record, state your name and municipality
Graham
resident.
Ross and Oak Bay. First of all,
Mr. Ross, would you just direct the microphone a bit towards your
Yeah.
mouth so that we can, there we go.
okay. Recommendation number 10, where public are asked to reapply for another term of on a commission or committee. I thought that was my first idea, and then I thought it could be a little onerous asking everybody to reapply every 2 years and so. But what I did suggest, and it's in my letter to council, which I won't read, is that for this next go-round, that people reapply at least. So I'm in a middle ground, but I think it's very important, given the difference in outlook of this council, maybe from the last, would have a different approach to the selection of members. So I'm recommending, I'll certainly go along with the reapply, but at least for this next go-round. The other recommendation, number 13, which was to combine the two commissions, I think it's a poor idea. I think people come to Heritage and they come to APC. I've been on the APC in North Saanich. My wife's on Heritage here. It's a totally different skill sets and cultural biases that people come to these commissions, and I just don't think there's a natural fit. However, my major point here is, and I noticed that there are three members of the public have written letters, and without any collusion, we've all concluded that what is needed is public involvement. There's an idea that on the part of some, and I've attended not so many Heritage, but APC and so forth, the idea that there's sort of an elitism and the them and us and the public, we don't need to have them around. And that's what I think want to get the public to engage with what's going on with the commissions. And I'm recommending a short public participation period, 10, 15 minutes maybe, at the end of a meeting for people to speak. And so that's my recommendation. It's also the recommendation of the two other members of the public. And basically, that's it. Oh, I did want to say, and I forgot, my empathies go with Councillor Patterson. There was a time in my life where I lost my voice, and my otolaryngologist said, voice rest, don't talk, and don't whisper. So that's a little tough. But, and I was younger, and I was, in the workforce, but I had to opt out, go and live with my parents. It went on for 6 months. So I hope that my empathies are with Councillor Patterson, because the inner need to say something and the inability to discharge that is a very frustrating experience. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. I will say, Ashley, you'll go ahead and have a seat, and anybody, the next person wishes to come forward, please do. I will just fill that time with 30 seconds of rambling, and that is how much I do appreciate Councillor Patterson still arriving here and participating despite this. It is not an easy thing to do, and it is frustrating, and I'm sure it'd probably have recommended bed rest. So definitely appreciate it, and I think it reflects, frankly, the commitment that council has to their responsibilities here. It's welcome.
Thank you very much. I am Christina Leach from Oak Bay, and I'm also the chair of the Advisory Planning Commission. So I'd like to start by thanking you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I also, of course, want to thank Sonia Santarossa for all the work that you've done. on the Council Committee and Commission review. I'd like to start by applauding Council in moving forward with this review, as it is an important process to pause and review public serving functions from time to time to ensure effectiveness and to evaluate whether the desired outcomes are being achieved. I did share the report with the members of the Advisory Planning Commission, which I'll just call APC from now on. I shared the report with APC in advance of this meeting, and in response, most of the members of the Commission expressed two shared sentiments. First, the suggestion of a council liaison for APC was welcomed. And second, the suggestion that APC and the Heritage Commission be merged into a single new body was concerning, particularly if it was to be a committee of council with the inherent limitations that that structure carries with it. APC members expressed a concern that merging these two commissions might have the effect of diluting the purpose of both commissions, while combining the groups would allow the efficient consideration of applications that invoke both land use and heritage issues. It is difficult to imagine that this efficiency does not come at the cost of other issues currently under APC's review. As the consultant report points out, the APC's mandate includes the possibility of advising council on development policies and initiatives that promote a sustainable community. By linking land use, transportation, environment, climate change, economy, heritage, social and cultural considerations, as well as advising on measures for progress towards achieving the official community plan goals and objectives. The makeup of APC's volunteers reflects this larger scope. And as written, the bylaw affords the larger role for APC than that of an advisory body, which only responds to applications. Oak Bay's strategic plan seems to point to areas where APC might be used in this more fulsome manner, but would a combined committee of council be capable of providing such a similarly diverse set of feedbacks? If I could summarize the comments that I received, I would say this: there's a fear that the downside of combining APC with heritage might not fully be understood, but that the promise of efficiency might override those considerations and those consequences. For example, it was brought to my attention that while Part 15 of the Local Government Act does make a linkage between heritage conservation and land use, it also makes it clear that the preference is for a heritage commission and not a committee. Additionally, combining the two commissions seems to complicate the staff recommendation from the consultant's report that APC include an environmental and transportation focus as well. If the two commissions or committees do remain separate, efficiencies might still be found by having both groups meet together at times, or perhaps having those meetings run consecutively on the same night. That would provide efficient review on particular applications while keeping each commission's mandate clear. There's certainly no easy solution to the priorities that you're attempting to balance in this report, but I'm reminded of the proverb that suggests that one can go fast or one can go far, but the method to achieve those goals is often different. Certainly today's decisions, no matter what they are about, have long-reaching implications that require we carefully consider our impacts from as many lenses as possible. How you bring those lenses to bear is, of course, completely council's purview. But I would state that being allowed to serve my community among the astoundingly deep talent and expertise that exists on the APC Commission continues to be a great honor for me, and given the complexity of the issues we face, I would not think one would want to sacrifice such a resource. And then I would just like to also make a couple of comments based on questions that have been asked, in particular regarding the canceled meetings that we've had. I think there might be some confusion about that. And I do know that most of you here on council might remember at the beginning of 2018 when we had a joint meeting and we talked about the fact that we were streamlining things for a number of reasons. But one of the things we did was remove any minor applications from consideration by the APC. In so doing, perhaps what was considered minor, I mean, perhaps it's an issue of what is considered minor has grown too large, and that is why we have not seen any applications. I think the reason for doing that initially was in order to allow APC's purview to expand, to deal with the kinds of policy things that you were talking about, Councillor Zelka. And I just think perhaps in all the changes that have happened, that hasn't really been picked up. regarding issues coming directly from APC, I would just say that any kind of initiative like that is going to encumber staff resources. And so for that reason, we have always felt that it must absolutely come from council because we need that directive. And finally, with respect to the procedures manual, that is something that we actually have been asking for a council vote on for quite some time. But again, with the very busy schedule that you've had, we've always assumed that when we've been asked for it and told that it can't be accommodated right now, that that is something coming from council. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And we do have a lot of work going on right now with our policies and procedures bylaw, so that is correct, absolutely. Maybe, Ms. Relly, did you want to add to that?
Just one other point that really, as that's come to my attention, it really is about how does that shake out in the context of this commission and committee review. So thank you very much for that input.
Thank you. As you were talking, I wrote two notes here. I said liaison good, APC and heritage together not so good. That was my summary of that very eloquent speech, just so you know. Oh, an X and a check beside me here, so we have an efficient note taking here.
And I would also second that. My name is Bronwyn Taylor, and I'm with the Heritage Foundation and the Heritage Commission. I'm going to greatly abbreviate my notes here because so many points have been covered already, but I will leave them with you because I didn't have time to make a submission by 3 o'clock. We were very pleased to see several of the concerns expressed by our members on their surveys and during the interviews with the consultant have been addressed in the recommendations. And I've listed 7, and I won't go into them now. They're there for you to read. The report seems to indicate that other concerns expressed by members of the Heritage Commission will also be addressed, such as involving the Heritage Commission much earlier in the processes once Building and Planning Department receives an application, and notifying the Heritage Commission when items it has reviewed will be addressed by Council, so we can come to the meetings and comment if necessary. There are recommendations we strongly oppose or certainly feel the need for further discussion. First and foremost would be that the Heritage Commission not be amalgamated with the Advisory Planning Commission and that neither body be reclassified as a committee. And there are several reasons that we oppose the amalgamation. While there are times applications should be reviewed by both bodies, our mandate, skill sets, and the lenses we use to evaluate applications are different. To combine would weaken both our mandates. The Advisory Planning Commission specifically examines land use and the OCP, whereas the Heritage Commission looks more broadly at existing built and natural heritage, neighborhoods, and streetscapes. And as Christine mentioned, Part 15 of the Local Government Act, specifically Division 3, Section 597, enables local governments to establish heritage commissions rather than committees. Further concerns include comparing Oak Bay to other municipalities of comparable size is fairly meaningless. We're a built-out established community, whereas many of the others are growing agricultural and or industrial areas. And amalgamating the Heritage Commission and Heritage Foundation. The Commission is a policy body governed by bylaws and relevant legislation and makes most of its decisions based on the values expressed in our Heritage Plan, whereas the Foundation provides grants and promotes heritage knowledge within the community through such things as the lecture series, night market presence, guided walks, and other awareness-raising activities. And the comment about us being so dependent on the archives for our information, we do have both Foundation and Commission volunteers that are also volunteers in the archives. And because we're familiar with the resources there, we really are not dependent on staff time and assistance to do our research. Perhaps some of the confusion between the Foundation and the Commission arises from having a significant number of members sitting on both tables. Limiting the overlap, thereby increasing the number of citizens involved, could easily rectify this. The Foundation and Commission could hold a joint meeting to discuss and define which body will be responsible for which tasks, which we've done in the past very successfully. But I think the confusion comes because there are so many of us wearing both hats that it isn't always clear who's doing what. Thank you for providing the opportunity for input, and we hope favorable consideration will be given to our concerns. and I'll leave you with the notes.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor.
And now for something completely different. I think this
Sorry, could you just state this is for the record for people at home, your name and municipality
Barbara
residence.
Judson, Oak Bay.
Thank you, Ms. Judson.
I think this may relate to recommendation number 12, that the Code of Ethics apply to committees and commissions. The Advisory Planning Commission was formed in 2015 after residents expressed a need for greater scrutiny over land planning and reduced opportunities for political influence than would be provided by a committee. I wonder if APC members can be unbiased in representing the interests of the community if they also work for provincial government departments or other employers, including developers who likely have different goals than the citizens of Oak Bay. If commission members have direct ties to the development industry or a provincial government ministry whose role is to promote and get built a particular type of housing, how can those members not be conflicted? Remember that the Commission was formed to reduce opportunities for political influence. Hypothetically, a member of the Commission could, under current conflict of interest guidelines, also be paid by a developer, or be paid for being part of a team promoting a development, or be the owner of a company working for one of the above bodies, while also advising council on a development proposal. Current conflict of interest rules would allow this, as long as the member A declares their interest, B does not participate in discussion of the matter, or C leaves the meeting for the duration of the discussion. Perhaps conflict of interest guidelines should also be revisited, reviewed, and revised. That's a request. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe that was formed part of this view and those, but just thank you very much, Ms. Judson.
It also concerns recruitment of members, new members. That was part of your...
No, I'm just I believe this would be essentially looking to if I look at from an overarching piece from a policies, there is an effort to align the committees and commissions, guidelines and code of ethics and things between council and the pieces. So that would be essentially fall into that. And the conflict of interest rules, I think, are fairly clear for municipal government. But I don't know if there's any other comments for Ms. Varela.
One of the things staff would be looking for as part of the orientation is to do some conflict of interest training with members. And one of the related spin-offs from perhaps this review would be membership review of any given body.
That's fair. It is always a little tenuous, especially we're a small town. And please come forward and have a seat. And it's hard in a small town. It's worth raising. Thank you for raising it. It's hard to get more than 1 degree of separation in this town apart from, and when you're seeking expertise, it's hard to have people who haven't worked for various people at different times. So it is an interesting and difficult thing to manage. So I think it's something that we have to flag. Thank you. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. My name's Nancy Barnes from Oak Bay. I wasn't really planning to say anything tonight, and I might be speaking somewhat in the dark because I haven't read this report in full. But since this came up amongst people that I've spoken with a lot, and especially at last night's meeting that was held, and we are talking about, or you are talking about commissions and such, I did want to just reinforce the point that a lot of people feel it would be really important for the APC to receive information from the community as part of their consideration of major developments. That the community context is a really important part of it, and to leave that aspect till after the APC's made its recommendations, and I think it encourages what's the word? Disharmony, let's say, in the community. Whereas if people are allowed to be part of the initial process of vetting a development at the APC stage, then I think you're going to might have less conflict. And as an observer of APC meetings, I've had to listen to proponents give false information and be able to say nothing, and watch the APC make decisions based on erroneous information. And I just think it's really important, and I know that public input's a recurring message that people are trying to get through, mentioned last night, especially with these commissions. They're supposed to be representing the public, but they're not really. So that's basically what I want to say. And I know there's lots of people who feel that way, and I've mentioned it before.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it ties into the first points made here in terms of policies, is that what is the point of these? And there is not a clear answer for that. I will say, I think there's we have public input, at various points in the process, and where that happens best is an interesting one. And again, what's the role of the committees? If we're seeking expert advice, then the public input is probably not that relevant. If it's seeking more the broader piece, then that's a different question. Ms. Varela?
And certainly from the staff perspective, Your Worship, where and how public input feeds into the processes of this local government will be further detailed in the procedure bylaw that we're currently knee-deep in. So thank you.
I'm just going to say, every time I walk into the chief administrative officer's office, it's about 4.5 feet high and full of procedures bylaw discussion going on, so stacked with paper. So it is definitely being actively worked on, I can attest. Is there anyone else who wishes to come forward to talk to council? I'm going to just say I really mean it. This is probably the last time I'll ask, and then we'll come back to this table. So if anybody wishes to come forward. Okay, so we'll come back to this table then. And just cognizant of the time, it's 9:02. It would be nice to get out of here at 9:30, 9:45. So I don't want to keep us too late and not have a good piece. But so maybe we can, I think the way that it's been organized is probably a really good one, because we can probably get through some of these core pieces reasonably quickly, and then we get to the more difficult questions. Fair enough. So we have maybe some leftover questions. I think it's probably worth just. Do you want to do this as we go, or do they apply to multiple pieces? Okay, so Councillor Zelke, if you have some general questions, please do ask them now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to ask something more general just to start with. Going back to the I guess one of the frameworks we're using, the IAP2 framework, that ramps up the increasing impact of the decision and the amount of public participation that's included. Walking through the framework, it goes from inform to consult to involve to collaborate to empower. In terms of what's referred to as the spectrum of control or spectrum of input. In my research of the IAP2, it suggests that one of the ideas of this framework is the idea is to keep the decision makers engaged and honest. In terms of one of the many sort of lenses in terms of how to look at this particular framework, I think is a very useful and very helpful framework to help guide how we can reframe our engagement with the public through these committees and commissions. It seems to me that staff is relatively on board with respect to what's been described here, with respect to the first two dimensions of the framework, in terms of ensuring that we inform the public, ensuring that we consult with the public, where we essentially obtain public feedback on analysis, alternatives, and/or decisions. So for those first two aspects, it sounds to me like we're essentially saying this is what we're talking about, and we're sort of telling you information, and certainly wanting to hear information, but I wonder about the full engagement aspect. So I do note that earlier on we went through and came up with a rather involved report and recommendations of the Mayor's Task Force on Public Engagement. And it took quite a long and involved look, quite a hard look at the IAP2 aspect. And coming out of this particular engagement, it was pushing strongly, by my read of it, to include the third aspect, the third element of the spectrum, which is to involve the public. Involving the public, certainly having the public at all the committees and commissions, having a public voice, allowing them to participate. Certainly would touch upon the working directly with the public through the process. And essentially from the promise aspect of it, what I like about including involve as being an element of the spectrum that we pull into hopefully what we will achieve at the end is that, and I'll just read the promise to the public of the involve aspect. We will work with you, the public, to ensure that your concerns and aspirations are directly reflected in the alternatives developed. And we will provide feedback on how the public input influenced the decision. They don't have control. Control stays here. But what I like about that aspect of it is that the public is being told they're being heard. And that's the part that I felt was missing from the first two, which is why I'm really, really hoping that on this locus of control, the spectrum, that we consider including the third aspect of the IAP2 spectrum.
I think you want to be clear here, that was a framework for how this process was undertaken, not how all processes. So the information was how we're addressing the very difficult and multifaceted aspect of the committees and commissions report. And so we just commissioned a report. It's coming back, and now we're consulting on that as opposed to. So we're not.
Absolutely.
We didn't seek involvement of that piece.
You're absolutely right. So I'll just touch upon point 9 of the report, which is close the loop on public participation activities and demonstrate how input was used to inform decision making. Unfortunately, only the top half of the spectrum is provided on this this chart. The bottom half, which is the promise to the public, is really the part that I was trying to make with respect to the effect of involving the public. And I think the impression I've been given, and certainly the message I've been hearing through the various engagement aspects, is that that's the part that's been missing, and I'm hoping we can pull those in. It does make it harder.
To summarize that, you're suggesting that all the committees and commissions should have a public input portion of it? Is that sort of your prefer? Okay. And
we include a piece where we provide a closing of the loop, where we clarify. Let me use an example. The province of BC, when they're doing engagement, they always include a piece at the end, what we heard. There's an engagement piece, but before a decision is made, a report is issued or some statement is issued. What we heard. This is what we heard good, and this is what we heard bad. And it is laid out black and white before the decision is made, making it very clear that essentially the public cannot say, I wasn't heard. And sometimes I feel that on processes we've had in the past that I would not want to see repeated, some people could have said that the process is that they weren't heard, or they didn't feel like their voice was reflected in any way.
Okay.
That's all.
Ms. Rella, I want to tie it back to what we're talking about here, which is the specifics of the policies and process. So, Ms. Rella.
Again, as part of that education piece, Your Worship, we do have to talk about that not all deliverables or processes will have the same kind of public participation. What's useful in the IAP2 and why we pulled it is because of its presence in the task force, as well as it being the go-to piece for how public participation is carried out, is it gives us a tool to be able to say how the public will be engaged. And again, that will be different for different processes. How council wants to have public participation through the advisory body process is part of the mechanics you can work out for each of your individual groups going forward.
Anybody else? Just general questions? Otherwise, we'll start walking through the recommendations one at a time. Does anybody else have any feelings on the on that role? I mean, it kind of comes. Maybe we can talk to it as part of these recommendations. But I will say, from an overarching philosophy perspective, the guiding principles to establish council committees and commissions, I always want this body to be accountable for the decisions that we make. And I will say, I'm very proud of this council, and I say this all the time to everybody, because frankly we have hard decisions sometimes, and people are taking the time to reflect the reasons why they're not supporting certain points of view, and they're listening to each other and to the public, and no one would come out of this thinking they hadn't been heard, and I think that's the job of council to do that. And the information comes from so many places, so I think it's, I just want us to be making really good decisions with all the information at hand, and that to reflect that. So I don't want to ever. I think that's my goal of all of this is that my vision of these committees and commissions is to make sure that they're getting us the information required to make those decisions, and then we're accountable through that last piece, the most engaged one of people actually choosing us at the table when they have a vote. So I really appreciate the IAP2 there, and I just want to make sure that we're always remembering that we actually own the decisions in the end of the day, and we have a responsibility to reflect that we've heard the population when we're doing that, because ultimately that's our job really when we're sitting at this table. You're absolutely right that that's an incredibly important part of all of that piece. But I just want to make sure that we never give up the fact that we own that. We have to be held responsible for that. And piece. That's when I read number 1, I'm like, this is my guiding principle. I want to make great decisions, and we need to get the best information possible from staff, from the committees and commissions, and from those other pieces, and then be held accountable for that. Because there's not always right decisions. There's shades of gray. Councillor Green?
Thank you. I would totally agree with that. I also agree with the role of the public in decision making, absolutely, and engagement. But I agree with you, Mayor, that I have seen cases where volunteers have been blamed for poor decision making by council bodies. That is unacceptable and inappropriate. So I would never want us to compromise the role of volunteers, because they're incredibly valuable to our decision making processes. But this is where the buck stops. I've always said that, and I appreciate your comments in that regard.
How would you see us sort of walking through this into making decisions or pieces on this? I mean, there's some of these are more guiding principle type things, and some of them are decisions. I'll take direction from Ms. Veller or Ms. Santarossa in terms of the best way that you see going forward.
So if council would consider starting with recommendation 1 and working through, if council doesn't feel they're going to get through all of these recommendations tonight, or wants to consider other alternatives to these recommendations, staff is suggesting that perhaps you continue this discussion on November 18th. There are a couple big pieces on that agenda already, which is the next committee of the whole, such as your tree bylaw. But it is another night where Ms. Santarossa is available to attend if you carry this meeting over.
So are we, let's go through this as quickly as we can. I'm just trying to get a sense, are we trying to establish a vision and guiding principles tonight, or are we trying to just sort of agree that we need to do that?
So the recommendation could be reworded that staff be directed to draft a council vision and guiding principles. So we would come back with, 1 and 2 could be moved together, and we would come back with that policy work at a future meeting for consideration.
Okay, Councillor Green?
If you have no objection, I'm quite prepared to move recommendations 1 and 2.
Moved, is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion? The only thing I would just say here, the vision and guiding principles is probably to this body, and a policy to guide the function and operations is probably a staff piece. So maybe we can just put, if we do this, perhaps some thought that we can maybe have a little feedback loop we can maybe submit our thoughts on the visions and guiding principles, and that can be collated so we have something tangible to talk to, and and maybe even read ahead of time so that we're not sort of out in the in just sort of throwing things out at the next meeting. We can maybe say, yeah, that looks good, let's vote on it and move it on.
And Your Worship, these won't be quick or tight turnarounds. There is a timeline that's proposed in the staff report, but as we're moving into other tasks such as water and sewer rates, budget and strategic planning, these do slot in the overall timeline of the departments.
If I may, the first one, though, I think of establishing some of those principles is probably very helpful, because I think that will help us guide some of the questions around where does the public input come in and those sorts of things as to what those guiding principles actually help. Because it's going to be a bit nebulous without that, and I think that's something that this body has to own. So I'm not sure, we don't have to figure out how to do that yet, but we'll see how fast we can get there. Councillor Green?
Just a quick question about process. Would it be advisable to ask chairs of existing committees and commissions to provide some input on these two, just from their perspective? It's a question. I'm not saying we should do it. It's a question of process. Would that be valuable to council?
Staff could take that consideration away and come back. Those are hard to answer on the fly. Thank you, Your Worship.
So we have a motion essentially to say, yes, we agree this has to be done. So let's deal with that for now then. So Councillor Zelka.
First comment is from Councillor Patterson. Just one question about the timeline, but I think that may have been essentially resolved. However, with respect to the timeline, will this motion or these motions delay in any way the appointment of committees in the short term, since we have to do some appointments very soon?
Ms. Varela?
Your Worship, there is a timeline that is proposed in the staff report that we could target, which is draft terms of reference, October through December. Council approval, we're looking for January, recruitment January, February, appointments February, March, and meetings in April. Those recommendations are contained in your report.
Thank you. The only consideration here, obviously, if there's going to be if there's sort of a movement here of changes, then that might have some impact on that. But I think we've asked a lot of our committees and commission members to just please hang on while we do this. And this has been, frankly, a much more thorough and comprehensive, I think, report and approach than we were probably originally envisioning. But we're now at a point where we do have. So I think that's a reasonable piece. But I guess subject to changes is probably the piece. Councillor Zelka?
I appreciate that guideline and the timeline, and I appreciate that it's going to take at least 6 months before we get anything sort of settled. I think is that about 6 months from now? Is that essentially the idea to finish? Where are we at? November, December, January, February, March, 4 to 5 months from now. So,
Ms. Varela?
Again, that timeline would be impacted by how much change council decided to implement. So if a lot of it is just rollover, those timelines can be advanced. If there's more change anticipated or directed, timelines will be affected.
So with respect to the flexibility of the timeline, I'm wondering if of some sort of I'll wonder out loud initially whether a transitory type approach may be needed, some sort of a reappointment of people under the current terms of reference, possibly staff them up, and then with the understanding that they'll be changing in 6 months, 9 months, whenever we're finally finished. We may need to do that depending on whether we actually lose quorum or not on some of our committees and commissions. So I would put that out there as a worry, because I appreciate all this work needs to be done, but you're right, we have asked a lot of our committees and commissions members, and I do worry about that.
Is there staff any input on that at this point, or just?
Right now, staff is it's staff's understanding that we are maintaining quorum on these advisory bodies. Again, we serve at the pleasure of council. If you want to direct us to amend work plans, advance other options over other projects, we serve at the pleasure of council. So we just need resource capacity and direction, and we'll deliver.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Green?
Just a question through you, Mayor, of clarity on appointments, recruitment, and appointments. Are we saying that we wouldn't recruit and appoint until next year, or are we saying that we will fill current vacancies and let people go that want to go according to our existing process?
Ms. Hopkins?
Your Worship, currently, I think the proposal is to do the recruitment once the review is complete and we know what we're recruiting for.
Supplementary question. What do we do in the meantime then with our existing volunteers?
We could, Your Worship, we could review the current terms of the current committee members and identify where there might be gaps and ensuring that we still maintain a quorum for those committees as they currently exist. And where there might be gaps where we might lose quorum, then we could possibly look at recruiting for a short-term period based on the existing terms of reference and establishment bylaws, and if and then with a proviso that their term would be for 6 months or whatever the case may be.
think I'm reading body language here. I think there's probably some desire to at least make a call out. Just there are often missed opportunities that people are looking for something to do, and you wait another year, they may have moved on and joined another board or committee, and we may want those skill sets. So I think we may need to find some middle ground there, where maybe we don't do a full review of the piece, but we do a call to see if there's any new bodies interested in some of these. I'm thinking specifically of the Heritage Commission that I think would like to see if there's anybody else coming in, but I'm sure there's others as well that would be interested, and some people who would like to step down but don't want to leave their bodies in the lurch. Ms. Hopkins, it looked like you wanted to say something. No, okay.
If that was council's direction, your worship, we would do that with the proviso that there was a vision, other mandates coming, there would be orientation training pending. So I think giving people, if you're going out to seek recruitment, you want to give people the idea that they're coming into somewhat of an unknown.
Yeah, I agreed 100%. Okay, thank you. So we have that motion on the table. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None of okay, number 3. Council committee and commission structure, associated governing documents reviewed by council staff and committees. Now, is this, I guess, probably the only thing I would ask here is for consideration if this on an annual or biannual basis, because just knowing our real staff capabilities, I don't know that it's practical for us to do this on an annual basis. Councillor Green?
Well, if council terms remain at the 4-year term, I would say biannual, so midterm review.
Well, midterm is every 4 years, then it'd be said the middle of each term.
No, midterm, meaning halfway through the 4 years, so it would be biannual, yeah.
Okay.
I'll make the motion that we do this recommendation on a biannual basis.
Okay, thank you. Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? If they all go that quick. Recommendation 4, posted to the website within a specific time frame. I'm going to ask the question here before we make a motion. Is that e.g. 5 business days? I'm assuming you don't want a specific, and at this point, you'll have to do some more detailed look as to what's a reasonable time, or is 5 days a reasonable thing to include?
Perhaps the council would consider an amended, something along the lines of that the draft committee and commission minutes may be made available and posted to the website in an advanced time frame, and then we can bring back what that would be for council's endorsement.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Mover and seconder, Councillor Zelka.
As long as it was clear that the time frame would be well ahead of when these minutes are needed. Because that's really been the issue. Not the fact that it's taken 5 days, is that they often come out after we've made the decision. So as long as that's included, or the understanding of that is included, then I'm generally fine with that.
That's my read, Ms. Varela.
Absolutely. I'm very clear on that, again, because we haven't had a chance to review this in the context of staff work plans. We have to come back to council with the mechanics.
Yeah, and it may impact the necessity for support services at those commissions and things as well. So, Councillor Zelka.
So from a technology perspective, I mean, I understand all of the committees and commissions are recorded. At least audio recorded. They're not? Oh, I thought they were. I know some of the meetings I saw were recorded in the past, maybe not anymore. Because that might be a possibility if at least a recording of some sort was made available. Since I know they're not webcasted, that might satisfy some. So dropping that point, since it sounds like it's not available.
If council wants to talk about that service level, your worship, that does impact resources and budget, but that's absolutely doable if that's a direction from the table.
And the only reason that I mentioned audio recording is that I understand all committees and commissions will have microphones. So just plug a recording in, and then within 5 days put the recording available on the website while awaiting some sort of typed minutes. That's one possibility to alleviate an issue.
Fair enough. I believe there will be minutes taken at the meeting, so I think the intention is to, it reduces duplication, but we can Again, if you wish to make a motion to that effect, you can do that, but I think.
But I do have one more comment, if I may.
Please.
With respect to draft council meetings and committee of the whole meetings, whether those would also be made available within the approximate 5 days. Is that included in this motion, or is it really just the boards, the ABCs, the advisory planning, the commissions and boards?
The intention of this recommendation applies to committee and commission minutes, Your Worship. If council wants to look at other processes, absolutely, we take your direction.
Okay, thank you. And I understand that would be because this is to inform our decision making this way, not just to provide information to the general public necessarily. Okay, thank you.
And then final supplement. This is a committee that we're in right now. So does it include this meeting, committee of the whole, or not?
Ms. Varela?
I believe you're already benchmarking that time frame, Your Worship, but again, that does not apply to committee of the whole. It applies to your other committee and commission bodies.
Yeah, typically we have committee of the whole that's received or approved at the following meeting, so they're posted within a couple of days of the meetings, typically. All right, so we have a recommendation motion made. Oh, we didn't. You suggested one that had a specific. Oh, did you make it? Okay. Sorry, I'm not giving appropriate track here. Not doing my job. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Recommendation 5.
I would like to make this motion, actually, I would like to refer this back to staff to find out and the legal, insurance, and quorum questions. I think that would be the right thing to do for this particular recommendation.
I think that's essentially what the motion is doing. Is sending it back to staff to give us to let us know what those costs are, what the implications are. So that's the motion made. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Is there any other discussion on this? Councillor Zelka?
My understanding is that we're already covered by insurance and by the province, but I'm fine to have staff take a look at it. That's fine.
Thank you. I think this is a really important one. There's for a number of the bodies to look, especially heritage, to go on site and look at some of these heritage aspects. It's a critical piece of their work, so we need to make sure that we're clear on this going forward. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Moving on to recommendation 6. This is the time limit.
I'll make that motion. For recommendation 6.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? You're doing pretty good so far in these recommendations. We're probably not going to get through all of them this easily. Recommendation number 7.
I think if this is a review of staff doing this, because they're going to have some consultation with the tourism committee, I think that would be the correct process to take, so I would make this recommendation.
I'll second it with the same understanding that it's a review and consultation with them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm reading from that. This is not seen as an urgent issue, so open to conversation, but it's not a short timeline if we're trying to get to other things more urgently. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Number 8.
I'll make the recommendation number 8.
Moved and seconded. This one seems almost like just a adoption of sort of a standard of practice, almost more than anything else. Is there anything? Most of these have been going back to staff for additional information and work. This is not. This is largely just piecing this together. Is there anything from a staff impact perspective that this one has?
This recommendation will just assist staff in the role clarification piece that will result out of this process, Your Worship.
Okay. So we have it moved and seconded. Councillor Zelka?
Yeah, I appreciate staff as seeking clarification on this in terms of the role. Very important aspect to make sure that it's a two-way communication in terms of flowing down and also flowing up, assuming we're above and they're below, or inside and out, depending on how you orient it. So I definitely appreciate this being here, and this also highlights the importance of this role as a way of ensuring the committee and commission that their liaison on is receiving the appropriate direction and sending the information back through. So an absolute linchpin to make sure that this achieves success for the district.
Thank you. Any other discussion? My 2 cents on this one is support it. Some thought has to be given if we're relying on this as a communications tool. You're always at the whim of someone that can't make a meeting that information doesn't flow. I think it's just important for us to reiterate consistently that the minutes form the official recommendations from that body to council and vice versa, and that's the piece that we're using. So if there's things that have to be said, those minutes have to reflect those pieces, and the liaison's role here is for clarification and pieces, not for carrying the decisions back and forth, because I think that's just a really critical piece just to highlight as part of that. Councillor Zelka, you.
Granted, understood, but at the same time, we've seen what happens when there is no council liaison, for example, with the APC, where from my perspective, I had no idea what was going on that particular committee or commission. And I was very surprised to hear that they wanted to present some information to council, and for some reason it never made it to council. So from my perspective, it looks like a disconnect. So I would imagine a council liaison would help in that situation. There was one more thing. I forget what it is. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? Unopposed? Number 9. Councillor Green.
Thank you. I'm happy to make the motion, but I wondered if I could add a small amendment to number 9, and that would be that staff be directed to develop and deliver an interactive orientation training session. And the reason I want to add the word interactive is that sometimes it's no more than a binder that's handed out at a meeting, and I don't think that's sufficient. I'm saying not always, but in the case of the Heritage Commission, I think Brahman will probably attest to this. We were given very complete and concise information in a very large binder, but there was no further involvement in orientation. I think this would be really important. So interactive, and then also to including the role of the chair. I think the role of the chair under the bullet points, I think the role of the chair is an important one. So that staff be directed to develop and deliver an interactive orientation training session to each committee and commission on an annual basis, including the role of the chair, if that's possible. Or maybe you have other advice. Thank you.
It was implied or intended that we would review the roles of staff, council liaison, the chair, members as well. So that would be part of the whole orientation.
Okay, that's fine then. So just the amendment of interactive added to the motion.
Is there a seconder? You can't have discussion without a seconder. Okay, nope, it's already been seconded, so go ahead and speak, Mr. Zelka.
I wish to move an amendment to the motion just made, that it be on a biannual basis to align with the, as opposed to an annual basis, to align with one of the previous motions we made for the review of the things being biannual. I'd like to make that motion, please.
So there's a motion to amend. Is there a seconder? Okay, no seconder. I think I know why. Councillors,
actually, I would have seconded it, except that I think that what what will happen is that we will actually have new members coming in every year, because it'll be on like a rotating basis, I think. So we will actually have members coming in every year, I think, Councillor Zelka, I think.
As long as we align it with the rotation of the people coming in, that's fine with me.
Yeah.
Yes.
That would be my thing as well, because you may have a different chair year over year, and they may have different things coming through.
And I have a secondary point.
Yes, Councillor Zelka.
This will also include, I would hope, the role and function of the council liaison. I think would also be would benefit from this training and orientation. Not only the council liaison, but also the backup council liaison. One of my concerns in the past, certainly in the previous mandate, was that the backup council liaison was often forgotten in the whole process. And that I found disconcerting, since I was back up on a number of committees and commissions and I had no idea what was going on. And once or twice I would actually attend a committee or commission to see what was going on, only to find out that the main person wasn't there and I was never told about it and I never received any minutes, and it was just like, what is going on? So I would really hope that that is a piece that we can fix here. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have the motion on the table for interactive, and interactive is clear enough to staff. Okay. Seeing other discussion, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Recommendation 10. This is to review the appointment and recruitment process. Yes.
I'll move motion 10. I'm sorry. I will move recommendation 10.
Well, a little punch drunk yes at the end of a long day. I'm just rereading this to make sure I haven't forgotten anything in my notes. So we have a mover and a seconder. What's that? No, it's been moved and seconded. Yes. Is there any discussion? Councillor Zelka?
Thank you. One of the suggestions from the public was that number 10, the B, would be only for this go-around where we're revamping the entire process. And maybe B would apply for the next time, 40 years hence or whenever, when we revamp the process. God forbid us 40 years. But as opposed to it being done every session, every time, which is what it seemed to be implying in terms of this wording, I'm assuming this really is only implying it's for this go-around. I just wanted to clarify, does this mean every term is only going to be 2 years and every time people have to reapply every time? And there's no carryover? Just wanted to clarify what's being intended here.
Sure. Ms. Santarossa, I'll turn to you as you wrote the words.
Sure. The intention was that at the end of every member's 2-year term that they would reapply if they wish to continue to serve on that committee. They would still be eligible for an additional 2 terms based on the terms of reference. But they would, rather than an automatic rollover, if they were still interested, they would actually have to reapply so that council could consider additional membership. Also, what I may have understood from the person who spoke earlier is that I'm not sure if he intended for there to be everyone to reapply, including those that still were within their 2-year term. But this is just meant for ongoing for now and ongoing those that are reaching their, I don't want to use the word expiring, but their term is expiring.
Yes. So
I think expiring members we don't have to worry about resubmitting.
I appreciate the clarification, and I can certainly align with the intent of those words. So I understand that we're trying to break a bit of a pattern here from the history where there's an assumption that once they're on for 6 years as opposed to a potential 2 years. Now, we haven't actually enshrined 2 years. It could be a 3-year thing. It could be some other number. But or right now we're anticipating 2 years because that's what's in the terms of reference. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And I think this is worth having in here. It's been my experience, this is largely being done every year. Every year, it's not onerous. We ask people if they're interested, and then we ask if there's been any changes to their application from the last time, and if not, we just consider that as part of the piece. But I think it's good to have it in our guidelines because it actually informs the fact that we should be taking a conscientious approach every time to make sure those balances are met, and that we actually do reach out and ask every time. So good to have it on here. So thank you for that. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Unopposed? Number 11. I'm not sure Ms. Hopkins loves number 11.
I'll make the recommendation number 11.
I will second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Before she can speak, fair enough. Recommendation 12, that the Council Code of Ethics apply to Council, Committee, and Commission members.
Question, if I may?
You may.
A point of clarification. Would this include an aspect of the conflict of interest review as well, and the application of it at the Council, Committee, and Commission level? So I wanted to ask whether it would include that or not, or whether we'd have to add that to this motion if we wanted it.
Ms. Santarossa?
The conflict of interest sort of guidelines would be included as part of the orientation and would be reviewed with the committee members. So the code of ethics, as it currently stands, as approved by council, this is just to clarify that it also applies to the council and committee and commissions.
So just to confirm, then the conflict of interest guidelines applies to everyone, no matter what. That's just already, as opposed to having to add it.
It's a little bit. There's some nuances because in the legislation, the consequence for council members is disqualification, but because a committee member is a volunteer, it's not the same consequences, but there are still provisions and methods in which a person should declare a conflict of interest, and that's something we can review as part of the orientation program.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Thank you. Oh, these are the easy ones. Excellent. Well, let's get through them. So these are the hardest ones because we're really looking at this from an overarching perspective of what do all of the committees and commissions going to look like and how do we achieve the goals within these frameworks. So this is the one I struggled with in terms of guiding a conversation. I really appreciate the recommendations broken out like this because I think they lie. Before I get to a motion on this one, because I think this is a hard one to make a motion for given the conversation that I've heard around this table, perhaps we can just go around and just see where people are leaning right now in terms of the combination. If they're feeling that this is something worth exploring and we would get more information. Ms. Varela, you wish to add something before I talk too much?
Your worship, no, never, your worship. If council decides this one is too weighty, there is the alternative of just not making a motion and bringing this back for reconsideration on the 18th. So there's no undue pressure here.
It's fair enough. I do, though, want to move this forward as quickly as possible. And so if council will indulge me on this one, can I just go around the table from Z to A here and just get a sense of where your feeling is based on the conversation that we've had? Are you leaning in favor of this or leaning not in favor of it? Just so that because if we're all in one sort of general mindset, we can start moving a path forward.
If we have a council liaison with the APC, and if we have public participation, and if we have a process where there's a good information flow from council to the APC, and I see that they're actually, I can see movement from sitting at this chair, then I'd be fine to keep them separate. If.
Okay, I'm just going to, the only one of those I didn't quite understand was the involvement of public participation being contingent upon being joined or apart. That seems like a separate piece than the idea of joining the two commissions together.
For me, I don't see that. No, sorry. I would want to see there be public participation, as there is with the Parks, Rec and Culture Commission.
But you're not. Are you saying that you would want public participation if they were merged, but you don't, or if they were kept apart?
What I'm trying to say is that if we do not do public participation, merge them. If we do public participation, I'm fine to have them separate. As being one of the things I'd like to see.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yes, as being part of that push to make sure that things are happening.
I could get a thumbs up or a thumbs down from Councillor Patterson. Do you have an inkling on this idea of merging them? Oh, good. She's typing even. That's better. Councillor Zelka, could you read that for her?
Right. Starting from where? From the when? Yeah. All right. It's a number of words. When the APC was formed, the district had only one planner on staff. We now have 3 planners on staff to provide advice to council, and also manage consultants where greater knowledge or additional resources are required on land development. Comments from commissions and from the public which indicate more in-depth consideration by council is warranted prior to a decision on the mandate and knowledge of APC membership. I recommend deferring decision pending clarity of expanded capacity for staff to provide advice on land use and to consider public input at meetings. Is that a separate point, or is that standalone? Okay. I recommend that the Heritage Commission continue as a separate commission.
Okay. Councillor name? This is not making a decision. I'm just trying to get a sense if people are feeling like they would like to do them together or not.
I struggle with this one, so I could see it both ways, but you know, I think maybe at this time, I probably lean more into keeping them separate until, as part of it is that the Heritage Commission continues to play a distinct role that it's kind of an evolutionary thing. It's matured, and its contribution and its work in advising council continues to thicken, and I just think that as a body by itself, it's able to do that work and then inform the Planning Commission as required. I think it's really important to have heritage people on the commission to help inform those land use decisions, and I really think we have to make use. The council needs to make use of that Planning Commission much more strategically with policy making and whatnot. So,
Okay, Councillor Green.
Thank you. I appreciate the input from the two chairs that are here tonight, and also having served on both the Heritage Commission and an Advisory Planning Commission in another community. It's helpful to me. I think I'm persuaded that they should remain separate, but I am concerned about two things. One, that there is no heritage liaison, council liaison to. Sorry, there is no council liaison to the APC. I think that's necessary, and I'm glad to know that you asked for one at some point. And secondly, I would like to see better cohesion and communication between these two bodies. And so if there are projects that are joint that could be accomplished through a subcommittee, if it didn't impact timelines around applications, I think that's one way of bringing these two together on joint projects. But I think they should, for now, remain distinct, provided that there are council liaisons for both.
Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. I, like Councillor Ney, really struggle with this one because, you know, I can see the merits of both. I think what the bottom line for me, though, is, you know, when we have an application that goes to APC and they then refer it back to Heritage, the timeline, as you mentioned, Councillor Green, it extends that timeline for the applicant, because if it has to go from APC to Heritage, then back to APC, then back to Council, that's where I think that there's a bit of a disconnect in not having the two committees merged. So, I mean, I can go either way, but that's really where my main concern is that how it extends, how it could extend a timeline on an application.
Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm pretty adamant in my opposition to amalgamating the two commissions. I also agree that really strongly that there needs to be a council liaison to the Advisory Planning Commission. My feelings towards this run similar to what's already been stated, in that I feel like the level of expertise and the level of knowledge, this is a community that cares deeply about heritage, and there's a highly specialized group of people that participate in heritage. And as Councillor Patterson mentioned, even without being able to speak, thank you, Councillor Patterson, that mandate is also broadening to include natural heritage as well. So there's yet another inclusion on their work plan. And has also been mentioned, conversely, the Advisory Planning Commission, just to harken back to where the Advisory Planning Commission came from. It was created with the idea that it would subsume and take on some of the roles of the Active Transportation Committee and also the Environment Committee, so that there is quite a lot of potential responsibility and work implicit in the APC's design and in its structure. And I am, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, but having been on the Advisory Planning Commission, I'm fairly adamant in my view that we as council need to provide the work and provide the guidance to the Advisory Planning Commission to make best use of them. So I think it's been identified that communication back and forth needs to be improved with the Advisory Planning Commission to make best use of it. The liaison is obviously the most present way of doing that. So I think that there is a lot of benefit that can be afforded to the district by the use of the APC in the way that it was originally constructed. So that's my opinion on that.
Good. I mean, my feed of this. I mean, I get you can make arguments either way, absolutely, and I think that making sure that both bodies have fulsome and meaningful work and is an important one, and so I thought about that, but that would be benefited by the merger. My inclination on this one, I would say, is to keep them separated, for the reasons that are articulated here. The level of expertise, and I think you would lose some of the passion and the knowledge on the heritage by subsuming it. I think you still have to have the Heritage Foundation, so that would still create a less, because they do align quite nicely. And the APC, I think you've heard from everybody here, we would like to find a way to use the skill sets on that more effectively, because it sort of was formed and then not used. And in fairness, that's just part of, we're in a bit of a cycle where there hasn't been large land use decisions and changes happening, but we'll have more. They do come and go, and I think if we take that broader holistic look of the OCP and things, we could use some of that expertise. So I think my inclination is to separate. I haven't heard no strong opinions that we have to make this change, so I'm not that inclined to kind of direct change unless there's a motion that someone wants to make that effect. Ms. Santarossa, did you want to add something?
If I could be so bold as to perhaps recommend an alternative recommendation that you could consider tonight, or again defer until the next committee of the whole, just based on what I've heard, 3 parts. The first is that the Advisory Planning Commission and Heritage Commission continue as separate commissions. Number 2, that a council liaison be appointed to the APC. And number 3, that staff be directed to review the information flow and referral processes between the 2 commissions.
We can have the motion. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
It's not my choice whether it's fine or not. After all, I just am here to. So we have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Zelka.
Regarding the third item, is the punctuation is important. The referral process is one part. Referral from what? From council to commissions, or referral between the two, or what?
So currently the process, if I may, Your Worship, currently the process would be that if the Heritage Commission wishes to refer something to another committee or commission, it has to go back to council, and council would make that decision. We could take a look to see if we could somehow streamline that process so we don't add significant time to an application.
Okay, thank you. And that was sort of the reason I was like, oh, there was the last third piece there, because there's a lot that goes into that referral piece, right? It has staff reports attached to it, and those pieces. So I think that was sort of how's that going to work? So as long as we're exploring it, that's perfect. So thank you. All right, thank you for that suggestion. So was that moved and seconded? It was, okay. And thirded. Any other discussion on that? All right, we have that motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Look at that. We got to unanimous and decision on sort of ish on that one. Recommendation 14, dissolving Parks, Rec and Culture Commission and establishing a select committee of council.
I would like to move recommendation 14.
Second.
Is there any discussion on this? I will say personally, I don't have an issue with the intention of this. The reestablishing it as a select committee of council and what its role would be and all those questions. I think I would love to get some sense from this body what that looks like, because I still see that there's a real value of community involvement in this, and I guess that's sort of some guidance of where that thing would come, either just to go back to staff to get information on how that might look and have some tangible pieces or something. Councillor Braithwaite, you made the motion. So.
Yeah, I think that in the verbiage that Ms. Santarossa has under recommendation 14, she does say that there would be a benefit from the advice and recommendations of of it being a select committee of council. And so we could then consider reestablishing the current commission as such to provide advice and guidance on various parks, rec, and culture initiatives, such as the a playground committee or a parks master plan or something like that. So that's really what I'm thinking is that we would kind of pick and choose those committees as the need came up, and that could be a recommendation either from council or from Parks, Rec, and Culture staff.
So, could hit my button, Councillor Green.
Thank you. And I don't disagree with this decision, and I don't have a lot of knowledge, I have to admit, about the Parks and Rec Commission. Just one question and then some comments. Does that include the Arts Committee? Is the Arts Committee included under this?
I don't think so.
No, okay. Oh, I see. No, not to dissolve it, but to address it. I think it's really important, though, how we explain this to the existing volunteers. I think it's important that we are sensitive, that we indicate to them that they are valued, that they are appreciated, because I did honestly get some pretty heavy feedback last night at our community meeting. And so I do care about how we treat people in our community. So I think we have to be careful that this doesn't come across as maybe something punitive rather than something new and refreshing and a way of repurposing volunteers on projects and so on. So that's all.
I'm going to go to Ms. Santarossa since she's here in this capacity, and then to Mr. Councillor Zelka.
I just wanted to clarify, because the commission is established by bylaw, in order to actually dissolve it, you need to repeal that bylaw. So despite this recommendation this evening, there would still be an additional step in order to actually dissolve the commission.
Councillor Zelka?
Like you, Mayor, I would like to have some sense of what we would be going towards before letting that go. So I appreciate we have a process to go through before we get there, and no doubt this select committee will be formed so that there'll be some element of continuity, I would hope, I would imagine. I would hate to see this devolve into like a working group or a task force that is just small initiative. Like I don't want it to be a playground or a parks type thing, dealing with one initiative and then dissolve. I'm imagining it will be standing from mandate to mandate, similar to the commission, or are we imagining that this thing would be reformed depending on what projects are active that particular month or year, or what are we imagining?
I think those are all the questions that are outstanding currently. And I think this is an important, thinking about how to word this to that commission, that current commission, what this motion means. I would take that wording to say, essentially, we're taking away the commission, making it a committee, and we're going to look at what the framework of that would be, and we can probably take some input, I would expect, from the current members as to what that breaks out, because there are a number of things that we don't, like I said, currently doing the events, fundraising. Look, we're doing reviews of parks. There's all kinds of things we could use those pieces for that don't fit into the current sort of structure of it. So maybe instead of monthly, it's 3 or 4 times a year or something that they meet. Councillor Name?
Just one other point. It's actually building on Councillor Green's earlier point about communicating to the public. And, you know, one of the functions the commission seems to have served, at least from the public's perspective, is that it's an opportunity to have community input into the workings of the parks and recreation operations. And to that point, I think it's important that when this is communicated, that the public really understands that there do exist current portals for giving feedback or having input into operations through the organization, because I've just noticed on their website and experiences I've heard from staff, when the community connects with staff at the Parks and Rec, they're unbelievably receptive to changing and altering. Like they take it very seriously. They're a very receptive and open organization. That's my experience. And of course, the community has the opportunity to come to the council as well if they have concerns about the operations of the the programs there. So, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we don't lose that, and that the community recognizes that taking away the commission doesn't mean takes away opportunity for voice about input into this organization.
So I hear the motion. I hear a fair tone of caution here in terms of what that actually looks like, in that we don't really know what that will actually mean in the big picture of things. So, just for my clarification, if this moves forward with this recommendation, is there been thought put into this from a timing perspective of what the process would be to kind of go through and do the more nuanced evaluation of what's needed, and how we might tease out some of the possible ways of structuring this going forward?
Again, Your Worship, because this report was just made available to both the public and staff at time of agenda publication, we do want to take this back, discuss it with the directors, bring more consultation or more discussion to a future committee of the whole. But it's the idea of, can we go and start to pull the pieces together to bring back to council for your direction?
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, it would be good to keep to ensure that the commission is held together through the budgetary process for Parks and Rec, which happens at the next Park and Rec meeting. So it's good to have that.
Well, they're around for a while because it is a bylaw process, and we wouldn't change that until we had a revised bylaw and piece in there. So, okay. Thank you for that. And I'm going to say it aloud publicly because I think it has to be said. The committee, the Parks and Recreation Commission, has done unbelievably good work. They're very dedicated. They put in long hours. They really have. They've contributed tremendously to feedback to the staff and with the public, and being a public face. They've shown up at all kinds of events. We had the public mural thing, and members of the commission were there in support. This is not a reflection on any of the work done or on everything else. That is not what this is. This is how do we structure this in a way that provides the best value for it. And I just want to publicly say how much I do appreciate, we as a council appreciate that work put in, because it is phenomenal. It's a lot of work, and they take it very seriously. And I think it just has to be said. This is not a reflection on that at all. That's all I had to say. Okay. Anything else on this motion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Zelka opposed. Recommendation 15. I should be I like, just so we can inform, because we still have a lot of work to do on this particular one. So maybe could you just, in 30 seconds or less, just give us some idea of things that we may be able to address some of your concerns in this process, since the motion is made, but where you see maybe some areas that need to be continued?
There's too many unknowns. I like turning a light on in the room before I walk in, so I don't fall down any potential holes. We have such a magical, wonderful thing that I worry about going into this darkness without knowing what's going to happen to the arts group or the arts committee, or not knowing what's going to, like, who does the CEO of the Parks and Rec answer to? Probably Lou.
That continues as Lou.
Like there's a number of things that are not very clear to me yet. So
we'll try and make sure we clarify those.
I might feel more comfortable, but right now I don't have that clarity. I see the suggestion. I understand the suggestion. I need more information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would also just suggest, if you can't walk into a room and not fall through a hole because the light's off, you should probably repair your floors. Sorry, that was
I apologize. I'm reading the immunity for individual local public officers in the Division 2 immunities and indemnities aspect, and it talks about falling into holes.
There we go. Top of mind.
Sorry.
All right. Recommendation 16 or 15.
Is this one that we're going to put on hold until our new Director of Finance comes, or is that not what we had discussed
It's
before?
up to this body, as that would be my preference, since we're only
Yeah.
a couple of weeks away from him
So
starting.
I will make that motion to wait until, to get input from the new Director of Finance. Yeah.
Thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Zelka?
Because of the word consider, I'm fine to act on this, but in a positive sense, and proceed with the wording as is, and then leave it up to the Director of Finance to provide direction with respect to what this suggests in terms of the details. So I have no problems with the wording as it is.
We have a motion to set it aside until he starts, so sure what to do with that. I will say, I think this is, from my perspective, just a courtesy just to, make this motion once he's here and has a piece on it. But Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. Is it possible to just indicate that we support the idea of creating a finance committee in principle, pending and then refer to discussions with our new Director of Finance? Just indicating that we do support the idea of this type of body in principle, but the details to be worked out with.
Why don't we have the minutes just reflect that, and it'll come. I mean, it's coming back. It's not being set aside. So, yeah. Okay. So we have a motion just essentially to set this aside, and then do we have some input from the Director of Finance? I can come back to this, not for years, obviously, but. All right. So any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Just 16. I know you just get to the end of a meeting, you just saw people stop caring anymore. That's the secret to success. Recommendation 16, Environment Committee. Again, I spoke to this already. I would like to bring back something in the short order on a working group, but if there's a desire from this council to move this forward at this time as well, that's something that's for consideration by this group. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate your comments on exactly this earlier. I concur very strongly that what is needed on the environment file, as Ms. Santarossa has indicated in her report, this directly pertains to our declaration of a climate emergency. I'm very much of the mind that if we want to talk about environmental topics in the broad sense, that the most important thing in the short term is to take substantive action to address the commitment that we made in declaring a climate emergency. So I strongly support the idea of a short-term work group be established to inform climate actions to be included in the 2020 strategic plan.
Second. Is that a motion? I'm sorry, no.
I'm not sure that I can move to create a task force in that way.
You wouldn't be moving it. You could make a recommendation that we could consider that. Ms. Varela, is that outside of the purview of this particular discussion, or how's your preference?
Staff could bring back a report on it. Certainly we have to work out the details, like which department director does it report to, how's the interface between council and the public. So it would be launching staff to go bring back a report for council's consideration. Sorry, it's getting late.
Well, why don't we do that? Because I think there's some work that's already happened on a terms of reference piece, just like some ideas of what that might look like and how that could so if we directed staff, then there's actually a will of council to have that piece. Is there anything else? You still have the floor, so are you done?
Well, maybe then I can just make the motion to amend the motion, or make a motion that people can speak to. So I would just formally make the motion to request that staff provide information to council on terms of reference and scope of work for a working group to address climate action goals as called for in the climate emergency declaration.
We get a seconder. I just want to make sure the wording is sufficient from staff's perspective.
It is. Staff will caution that, again, as we add something to the plate, something else has to move off. So we will be bringing back a discussion on impacts to work plans.
That is fair. Absolutely fair.
Understood.
Thank you. Yeah.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I had Councillor Zelka next. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. Before we overload staff with an abundance of reports, we have an advisory planning commission that is under-tasked. and actually has the appropriate expertise to potentially respond to a question such as this. And this might be a good opportunity to try out this innovative approach of referring something from council past staff and directly to the Advisory Planning Commission, asking them to possibly develop a policy or initiative that promotes sustainable community by linking land use, transportation, environment, climate change, economy, heritage, social, and cultural considerations. In particular, in this case, the environmental aspect.
Right. We can't never go past staff because they always have. There's always a staff component to these things.
Of course, it has to go through staff. But I would rather we not overload staff asking for a report, and then we ask it of the APC.
If I may, the report coming back would be a light report, is essentially giving us that piece, and perhaps if we could, that could be one of the pieces of consideration as how do we best use what we have available, I think this is appropriate. I would rather, before we start delving into these things, we're always going to need staff input. This essentially creates a shortcut, to my mind, by a couple of weeks that allows us to move this forward a bit faster. So I do appreciate the motion being made at this table because it allows that to happen. So, okay. So we have a motion on the table. Councillor Zelka.
With respect to some work that was done recently at UBCM and the initiating of the climate caucus, I did send some information through to all councillors, and I don't know whether Councillor Green or Councillor Appleton had a chance to see it or not, but all of the provisions with respect to establishing a climate working group and moving forward with a third option halfway between those two is already available in your mailbox. The report is already there. And a number of reports from a number of different local authorities, small and large, are already available in your mailbox. So it might be nice to have a made in Oak Bay approach on how to reduce climate change, but I think we could actually move sooner than that. I'd like to hear what the wording is of this particular motion, but I'd actually rather we just get on with it, frankly. Since we do already have the information already at hand. It would be the suggestion I would make.
I'm not sure how we get on with it without having some motion put on the table to do something, to actually make a motion, because we need to have a will of committee or will of council to kind of move that forward. Can we just read back the motion?
That staff be directed to draft terms of reference and scope of work for a working group to address climate action goals as stated in the climate emergency motion, something to that effect.
I'm just going to turn to Councillor Appleton. It's directing staff to come up with terms of reference, and I think we can probably work within that, but then we have to just recognize that we have to come back with some. Yeah, okay. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I think this is getting to it. I guess the intent of what I was hoping for in any case was for us to have some options to convene a group rather than an environment committee. This is as an alternative to an environment committee, but rather a working group of citizens and potentially council members to specifically work on action items that would arise from the climate emergency declaration. So just so that it's clear that this is an alternative structure in my mind for the short term to address specifically climate action as described in our climate action.
In hearing that, and I think what we probably want is a short report back saying what are some options of a way that we could form this, get that direction from council, and then create the terms of reference and those pieces. I think it's probably a better way. So just like some sense of what's possible before we make a decision is probably a better approach. That way we're not directing staff to go and do a bunch of work. It's more, here's a couple structures, and that would come just with some consultation with some of the people moving this. Is that a reasonable? Would require simplest is just would be to defeat this motion and just make a new motion. Is probably the simplest. Or if the mover wants to retract it and make the motion to do that, it's up to. Or if you're happy with creating in terms of reference, and that's fine too.
No, I can withdraw the previous motion that specifically spoke to terms of reference and potentially make a new motion that requested that staff.
Before you do that, Ms. Santarossa has her hand up, so I'll just.
I just was going to propose some alternate wording, that staff be directed to develop options on the establishment of a working group to establish climate action goals arising from the climate emergency declaration. No?
I'm comfortable to move that recommendation.
I'm comfortable with it too.
Okay, so can we just have a motion to, what's the wording here, to retract a motion or withdraw? We'd like to move to withdraw your motion.
Okay, I would withdraw my previous motion.
With the seconder.
Second.
You were the seconder, I think, with it. So, yeah, so the mover and the seconder have moved to withdraw it. All those in favor? Opposed? Unopposed? So the new motion would be, just read it aloud so we have it for the record.
That staff be directed to develop options on the establishment of a working group to address action items arising from the climate emergency declaration.
So going to move it, I'll second.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Is there any other discussion on that? Councillor Appleton?
Just very quickly, and referring to a couple of comments made by Councillor Zelka, and I appreciate those comments. Number one, just in my opinion and in my vision for the way that this would be prepared, the point is well made as far as there being lots of information out there on this topic and those types of things. Councillor Zucker referred to a made in Oak Bay solution, and that really was my vision of it, was to develop some priorities that were specifically for our community and community that had some input from the community. And it's well recognized that there are standard methods to take action on climate, and that's well understood. My vision for this was to create input from the Oak Bay community about something that they could really take ownership of themselves. And then secondly, another point by Councillor Zelka, which I think is also valid, is there may very well be a role for the Advisory Planning Commission in this. And so when staff are evaluating potential options, I'm sure that they would also maybe if I can make the request that they would reach out to the chair or potentially the membership of the commission to potentially inquire as to what their capacity might be in that regard, or whether or not that is a viable option for us to consider, because I think that that's a completely valid role for them to play.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zelka?
I echo all those comments, and the small part I'd like to add is I've already forwarded or re-forwarded the one of the documents from the Climate Caucus to all members of council and to a Director of Corporate Services and the CAO with respect to a number of links to a number of other local authorities in the CRD and elsewhere in British Columbia and across Canada on the establishment of climate working groups and the various reports that lead to that. So I appreciate the generalness of the staff, the wording suggested by staff, and the generalness gives me hope that they'll receive submissions from me and maybe from others on council with respect to some of this information, so that they can be synthesized by them and then brought back. And ideally also including the Advisory Planning Commission. I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Recommendation 17.
I am so happy to move this one.
Second.
And again, this would result in a report coming back saying what the staff impact of this would be.
With associated timelines.
Okay. Moved and seconded. I'll reiterate, I think this, independent of the zoning bylaw, is not the ideal path. I think that this motion is, it would achieve 25% of the effectiveness and not 100%. So I'm supportive of this, but I think there may be some. I think maybe what we can leave this with, however, if I may, is under our strategic priorities next year. I think because these have both come to that. that we might consider those next in our strategic priorities about how we're going to actually allocate resources if we're willing to do so on these items. So, any other discussion?
Just very quickly, I just wanted to add that this also speaks to our environmental work as well, because I think the uplands, while it is a particular area, these kinds of guidelines could be expanded to cover all of Oak Bay, in fact. And I'm mindful of that, and I know people are anxious about what is going on in the uplands as well. But it's I'm very supportive of moving in some direction with staff's advice and support.
Councillor Ney and then Zelka.
Yeah, just very quickly. Mr. Mayor, I'm just wondering if it's still consistent if we ask staff to just give us some input about recommendations to clarify not only the guidelines, but also what aspect of the zoning bylaw would need to be addressed. And it's not that we will do it, but at least then it's on the table and we don't lose it. So I'm just wondering if that could be included in the recommendation.
I think if there was a will of council or committee, then just adding design guidelines and relevant zoning regulation or zoning bylaw regulations for the uplands would be the appropriate piece. It makes it bigger, but I think maybe we'd at least capture the entire value of that. So if you want to make, that would be a motion to amend the motion on the table.
So I'll make a motion to make that amendment.
So design guidelines and zoning bylaw regulations. Yeah, relevant zoning bylaw regulations for the uplands. Ms. Varela?
And that will be coming back in the context of the upcoming strategic planning process.
Oh yeah, we know this is a big one. This is not an expectation to go do
Also
it.
good for the public to hear.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. So we have a mover and a seconder for the amendment. So any discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? So now we have the amended motion, which is includes the zoning. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you, Chair. Noting that we need to be quick. This is an opportunity to include reconciliation, since this is a known cemetery for our First Nations area. So the design guidelines, I believe, need to be sensitive to that as well as to the residents of the area. So I would hope that as part of the recommendation that comes back, that we take this opportunity to include all stakeholders, shall we say. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. So we have the main motion as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. We actually got to recommendation 18. I'm a little bit shocked on this one. Administrative support to the Heritage Foundation be reviewed. Moved? Seconded?
I'll second. I think Councillor
Esther
Patterson moved.
Okay. I didn't hear her.
But she did.
Moved second. Is there any discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Does that bring us to the end of our tasks today?
Should I move? Or do you want to say anything before?
No, there's no other pieces on this one. I think we've actually captured all the things to do for today. We have a motion to
move adjournment.
Second, but I just want to say thank you so much to everybody involved, and especially to Sonia. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll reiterate that on behalf of council. Not an easy topic to encompass, to put it mildly, and I have to say I really appreciate the fact that you gave your best professional recommendations on all these aspects, and I think the separation in this case from the staff and from the things in that, and just for us all to kind of see it at the same time, really helps us to kind of even the playing field on it, and obviously there's a lot of work to do to kind of work out the details and how it's all going to come together, but I do just thank you very much for the quality of the work and all the background material included as well, so thank you for that. All right, we have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. And thanks to everybody in the audience for coming tonight. I sat through a very long one this evening, 4 hours. Well done.